our rights, we do not deprive others of their entitlement to also enjoy their rights. I wish for everyone present and participating an enlightening forum. And I really, really regret that I'm not able to spend the entire day. But I will sit a little more before I have to run off to cabinet. Good morning, everyone.
Give her a bigger round of applause for me, please. Thank you. Yes, yes. Now it shows that you had breakfast. All right. Thank you, Minister. And we also thank you for your leadership and commend you as well for leading this ministry. Very important role that you have been vested with, and certainly we are confident in your leadership abilities. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this ministry has actually hit the ground running. We have established a unit. We have a unit in place. We have a human rights specialist who commenced duties November 9th, newly minted, and she, she had to ensure that this forum was a success, or is a success. And so she didn't have any honeymoon period, did she? Right, Captain James? So we are very pleased that we have a human rights specialist in place. We intend to recruit at least 2 additional officers to support the work of the unit in short order. And so it gives me great pleasure in asking Captain Natalie James, our acting human rights specialist, to come before us to provide an overview of this forum, so that you can have an understanding as to what will be discussed throughout the proceedings. Give her a nice big round of applause, please. Thank you.
Good morning, Honorable Minister Malawi Ford, Permanent Secretary Mr. Wayne Robertson, Ambassador Sheila Monteith, Permanent Secretary, Dr. the Honorable Lloyd Barnett. The Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs was established in January of this year and has the portfolio responsibility for constitutional reform, legal education, legal reform, and the protection of human rights. Human rights is of utmost importance to the ministry, and as such, this Human Rights Forum is one of the ministry's initiatives to educate the population about their fundamental rights and responsibilities. Every year on the 10th of December, the world celebrates Human Rights Day, the very day the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a milestone document in the history of human rights, drafted by a representative with different legal and constitutional and cultural background from all regions of the world, and it set out for the first time the fundamental rights to be universally protected. I will speak briefly on 3 fundamental rights under the Universal Declaration. Article 1, all human beings are born free in the dignity and right. Article 13, everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the border of each state. Everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to his country. Article 15, everyone has the right to a nationality. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality nor denied the right to change his nationality. These human rights are entrenched in Jamaica's Constitution. Section 13(3)(f) of the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedom states everyone has the right to freedom of movement, that is to say, the right of every citizen of Jamaica to enter Jamaica and every person lawfully to move around freely throughout Jamaica, to reside in any part of Jamaica, and to leave Jamaica. This is in keeping with Article 13 of the Universal Declaration. With respect to a nationality, Chapter 2 of the Constitution speaks to the process to acquire citizenship in Jamaica. Persons acquire citizenship by descent, birth, or registration based on marriage. It is important for persons to know about their rights and responsibilities under the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedom. The ministry will be leading this charge in its public education, but let me briefly provide an example about the rights and responsibilities of citizens. Some of our responsibilities are: serve as a witness in court if summoned, being loyal to one's country, being an active member in our community, being helpful and respectful to one's neighbor. Please permit me to share a shared responsibility between the government and its citizens. I'll be using Section 13.3K of the Charter, the right of every child. And it reads, the right of every child to such measures of protections as required by virtue of a status of being a minor or as a part of a family, society, and state. In addition, the right of a child to publicly funded educational institution at the pre-primary and primary level. The government has a right to provide educational institution for our children. However, as citizens, we have a responsibility to ensure that our children attend school. And citizens also have a responsibility to ensure that our children are protected as a part of the family and as a part of society. Learning about our human rights is very exciting. Please allow me to give you an overview of what our forum will entail. Dr. Hendricks, the Executive Director of the Jamaica Council for Persons Living with Disabilities, will guide you on the rights of persons living with disability. This is somewhat of utmost importance as we have family members living with disabilities and we are not sure what their rights are. You will then be enlightened by Mrs. Beckford Harrison, Director for Investigations at the Office of the Public Defender, who will inform you about the work of the Office of the Public Defender and how this office defends your human rights. Next on our agenda will be Ms. Brian Lee, Director for Vision 2030 Secretariat. She will inform you about Jamaica's Vision 2030 strategic objectives and the synergy of these objectives to your human rights. Be prepared to be in awe by Dr. the Honorable Lloyd Barnett, OJ, President of the Independent Jamaica Council for Human Rights. He will walk you through the journey of human rights from our independence to present. You will then learn about the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedom by Ms. Wilson, Crown Counsel at the Attorney General Chambers. We will be closing with a presentation from the Enabling Environment and Human Rights Unit in the National Family Planning Board. Yes, Jamaica has 2 human rights units. A human rights unit in the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, and an Enabling Environment and Human Rights Unit at the National Family Planning Board. Without further ado, I'll return the microphone to our Master of Ceremony. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain James, for that overview. For those in virtual land who may have tuned in late, we just had an overview of the forum. Before that, remarks from our Honorable Minister. And just in case you didn't know, I'm the Master of Ceremonies. You're going to have to put up with me for a few hours, unfortunately. My name is Wayne Robertson, Acting Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, and your humble servant. I will now ask Ambassador Sheila Seelemonteith, CDJP, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, to bring remarks. Now, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade has a critical role to play with respect to the Inter-ministerial Committee on Human Rights, And so given that this ministry has now been established, there will be somewhat of a passing of the baton and sharing of responsibilities. But Ambassador Sealy Monteith is our very critical partner in the process, and I ask her now to just bring remarks. Thank you, Pierre.
Good morning. The Honorable Marlene Malahoo Fort, Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, Mr. Wayne Robertson, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, Dr. the Honorable Lloyd Barnett, our constitutional law expert, and someone with whom throughout the many years in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, we have had to rely on his expertise and are very proud of his achievements. Colleagues all from various ministries, departments, and agencies, and those online and other platforms being with us this morning, very good morning. And I want to congratulate the Minister and Permanent Secretary for taking this step to recognize International Human Rights Day. The fact that it took place on a Saturday was even more reason for us to ensure that human rights matters are placed very squarely in the hearts and minds of our population. And so I think spending this morning, the 12th of December, having our minds turned on the importance of not just the protection but the promotion of human rights is an integral activity. I also want to congratulate the ministry for assuming and embracing the responsibility for dealing with subject matter, which, as we all know, embraces all of government and all of the population. So it is quite a demand that is being placed on you, but we know that you're fit for the task. With respect to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, the Permanent Secretary mentioned that we have an integral role. And I might just want to refer to one particular aspect of this role, in that over many years, we have led the work of the government in the establishment of an Inter-ministerial Committee on Human Rights. And Madam Minister will be happy to pass on some of that responsibility, if not all of it, to you, will remain an integral part of it. But certainly, this has allowed us to exercise the convening power in bringing together all those who are involved, both government and non-governmental entities, in looking at some of our responsibilities. It is obvious that the ministry itself is not a practitioner, as many other entities are, but we have the obligation in terms of our interface at the international level, and particular with respect to our reporting obligations under a plethora of international legal instruments. And so this Inter-ministerial Committee brings together all those who are related to the particular area. Disabilities, we are state party to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, so we have a responsibility to present reports to the international body on that. And so as a group, we will look at the report which is submitted with some regularity, and then the responses that we give as a government to the actions which we would have elaborated in that report. Recently, we did similarly with the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and we submitted our report. Again, it was a whole of government effort on this. We know that our NGOs were also involved in making their own submissions. We do that with respect to the Convention on the Rights of the Child and any number of conventions and international agreements to which Jamaica is a party. So our role has been quite supportive of the government's efforts to ensure that we hold the line, we toe the line, and we continue with the efforts to promote and protect the rights of all Jamaicans, and of course with the oversight of the international community. We continue to provide that support. It is our responsibility as we interface with the international community to be able to do that. And so today allows us to look at what is happening nationally. I'm pleased to see the lineup of persons who are going to be members of your panel. And I'm also struck by the timeliness of the involvement of the Mrs. Pisha Bryan Lee, because we are looking now at the SDGs and how they intersect with our responsibilities for human rights. So today promises to be exciting. It promises to be visionary, and I think that this also presages what the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs has in store for us as we go forward. I had an earlier word, Madam Minister, with the Permanent Secretary about how we can pass the baton a little more keenly from us to you, and we are very delighted to be able to do so. But I want to close by certainly affirming and reaffirming our ability and willingness to work closely with you and, of course, with all who are here representing your various entities. Looking forward to the engagement. Sorry that I won't be able to remain with you for much of it, but certainly be assured of the continued interest of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the work that we do. And I just looked at the corner of my eye, I saw Mrs. Davis Mattis, who was integrally involved in the work of in presenting our report to the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Good to see you, Mrs. Davis Mattis, and to all of you. Dr. Hendricks, we know your role in relating to matters of persons with disabilities. I want to thank all of you for the work that you do and know that it is important. Do continue your labor, not just of love, but it's a responsibility that we have. As we were reminded by Captain James, it is a responsibility that we have as a citizen. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful and productive day.
Thank you, P.S. Seeley Monteith, a very key partner in the process. Thank you for your continued leadership and support. We greatly appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, just to remind you all of the theme is, we are all in this together. My right, your responsibility. Very often we talk about rights. We want justice. Abrogate my rights. And what about responsibilities? Let's have a conversation about responsibilities that go along with rights. And that is a conversation we are going to be having with the wider populace. All right? So very important. I just want to ensure that you have that in the forefront of your minds. Just to restate the presenters, just to remind you all of what this encompasses, the program. Our first session will look at the Advancing Human Rights Agenda, and the presentation will be delivered by Dr. Christine Hendricks. That's up next. And Dr. Hendricks is the Executive Director for the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. Next, we'll have a presentation from Mrs. Kayla Beckford Harrison, Director of Investigations in the Office of the Public Defender. We'll then have entertainment, and then session 2 focuses on human rights, the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs as we call them, and Vision 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. That presentation will be delivered by Ms. Pisha Bryan Lee, Director of Vision 2030, Secretariat of the Planning Institute of Jamaica. We'll next have another entertainment segment, very small, very short. And then, next presentation, Human Rights, 60 years after Jamaica's independence, by none other, to be delivered by none other than the Honorable Dr. Lloyd Barnett, OJ. Yes, listen out for that one. And Dr. Barnett is President of the Independent Jamaica Council for Human Rights, and also chairman of the Citizens Action for Free and Fair Elections Cafe. There's also entertainment which follows, and then we'll have a very important presentation focusing on the horizontal application of the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms by Ms. Peter Gay Wilson, Crown Counsel in the Attorney General's Chambers. And to close the presentations, we'll have that final presentation from Mrs. Carleen Temple Anderson, Director Enabling Environment and Human Rights in the National Family Planning Board. Then we close. So without any further ado, I just permit me to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Christine L. Hendricks, Executive Director Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. Dr. Hendricks is a passionate advocate for the education and empowerment of persons with disabilities, and she's the current executive director of the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. We call it the JCPD, which was established as a statutory body with the Disabilities Act coming into effect on February 14th, 2022, this year. With extensive local and international experience, Dr. Hendricks has been a vibrant speaker and presenter at workshops and seminars dealing with various aspects of disability. As a member of the community of persons with disabilities, she has lent her considerable expertise and experience to the advisory and management boards on disabilities and the Abilities Foundation as a board member. She has also worked with government, civil society, and systems to facilitate effective, inclusive policies, practices, and services for individuals with disabilities. She has also served on several working groups and committees, including the Task Force on Disability Subsector Plan and the Task Force on Social and Vulnerable Groups, both part of Jamaica's Vision 2030 framework. Our commitment to enhancing the total well-being of Jamaica's children is rooted in the church and focuses on the essential ingredients for a sound society, which are good parenting and healthy marriages. Simple. The formula is very simple, Dr. Hendricks. Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Hendricks is a qualified teacher and counselor and holds a doctoral degree in transformational leadership with focus on cultural transformation, and also holds a master's in counseling psychology. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure in asking Dr. Hendricks to come forward to make her presentation entitled and focusing on advancing the human rights agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give her a nice big round of applause. As the minister said, she would have to leave a little early, so we do thank the minister for her attendance. She has cabinet on a Monday, so we understand, minister. Right. Thank you.
JP, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs and Master of Ceremonies. Please allow me to accept the protocols that have already been established. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. So we'll be looking at the promoting the rights of persons with disabilities this morning. And in setting the context, we will look at the process, the nexus between the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the Disabilities Act, looking at who we're talking about, the objectives of the Act, meaning the why of the Act. We'll provide an overview of the Act, a synopsis of the regulations, look at who's responsible for the effective implementation, some next steps, and conclusion. So for persons, yes.
Technical support.
Okay, I can go ahead until someone comes. Some persons in the room and perhaps online will remember 1981. I was a child, and I recall Jamaica celebrating and a whole heap of noise being made about persons with disabilities. I think it may have been my first time hearing about persons with disabilities. But 1981 was declared the International Year for the Disabled, remember? Yes. So 1981 started the process of persons with disabilities advocating greater for themselves, speaking up and speaking out, and a number of organizations were formed during this time. And later down in the 90s, into 2000, the National Policy for Persons with Disabilities was tabled in the Parliament. Persons with disabilities being part of that process, working with government and other stakeholders to ensure that there was a policy in place to represent persons with disabilities. You and I know that policy doesn't bring with it the teeth that is necessary. And so shortly thereafter, 2003, the drafting of the Disabilities Bill began. Persons with disabilities were very much front and center as the chairpersons of the committee leading this legal, guided by the legal team of the ministry, and of course the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the other ministries critical to the process, driving the process of drafting the Disabilities Bill. It took some time, however, Jamaica wastes no time at all, because by 2007, with the assistance of Senator Floyd Morris and then Mrs. Faith Inararity, they championed the signing and ratification of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and Jamaica being the first country to ratify same. 2009, Vision 2030 National Development Plan was being drafted and finalized, and persons with disabilities were not to be left out either. We were right there ensuring the crafting of the Disabilities Subsector Plan. And in 2014, the Disabilities Act was passed in the Parliament of Jamaica. 2015, Jamaica signed on to the UN Sustainable Goals, delivering on the 2030 agenda mantra that states to leave no one behind. And so persons with disabilities are very much focused in the Sustainable Development Goals. And finally, on February 14, 2022, the Disabilities Act came into effect. Now, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, most persons would know, is an international human rights treaty of the United Nations intended to protect the rights and dignity of persons with disabilities. I must say that they are no different from the fundamental rights, the Fundamental Charter of Human Rights that was passed many, many, many years ago. However, it became necessary for persons with disabilities to articulate what their rights should be with this Human Rights Charter as the foundation. So it is the same rights, but it is articulating specific rights for the persons with disabilities. And the 50 articles in the convention has 30 articles addressing the specific rights of persons with disabilities. And you will see some of these rights outlined in the Disabilities Act. So the purpose of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is akin to the objective of the Disabilities Act. And the purpose of the convention is to promote, protect, and ensure the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by all persons with disabilities, and to promote respect for their inherent dignity. The purpose of the Disabilities Act is to promote, protect, and ensure the full and equal enjoyment by persons with disabilities of privileges, interests, benefits, and treatment on an equal basis with others, and to establish the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. So although the council was in existence since 1973, the council was not in a position to enforce the tenets of the Disabilities Act nor the convention. Hence, it needed to be established as a statutory body, and that took place on February 14. And we are currently transitioning from that department into the full statutory body that we need to be. So the principles of the convention is also akin to the Disabilities Act. Both establish that, one, persons with disabilities are to be respected for who they are, and they are free to make their own choices. Many persons do not acknowledge this, but it is so. Persons with disabilities should not be discriminated against. Persons with disabilities have the same rights to be fully included and to participate in the community as everyone else. And now I know that for full participation and full inclusion to take place, there will needs be some things put in place that are called reasonable arrangements. And so we will talk about that in a little bit. Everybody should have respect for difference and accept disability as part of human diversity. So since none of us are the same, a person with a disability is just one of those differences, and so persons should accept same. Now, who are we talking about when we talk about persons with disabilities? Before I go into the definition, let me say that persons with disabilities are usually perceived as uneducable or uneducatable, needing to be taken care of in institutions, unable to vote, dangerous to self and others, a burden, lacking the capacity to decide for themselves, and condemned to have a less valuable life. But if we look at this picture on the screen, we see persons with varying disabilities, some that are visible and some that are not so visible. And I'm sure what was described before does not describe any of these persons who are very active and able to be an individual as everybody else. So a person with a disability, according to the convention, says a person with a disability includes a person who has a long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairment, which, in interaction with various barriers, may hinder his full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So in the convention that we ratified, it is saying that the impairment that a person has is not what causes the disability. What causes the disability is indeed the barriers that the person with the impairment faces, and thus preventing them from participating fully. The Disabilities Act, however, defines a person with a disability, and I smile because I know perhaps this is maybe one of the first works with the Ministry of Constitutional Affairs, Constitutional and Legal Affairs, to look at our definition. Because the Disabilities Act says it includes a person who has a long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairment which may hinder his full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. Some persons may not recognize the difference, but the difference is the Disabilities Act is focusing on the impairment as the possible barrier. So that is something we need to look at. Why is the Disabilities Act important? It clarifies the rights of persons with disabilities. It sets out responsibilities to respect those rights. It requires a rights-based approach to disability. So no longer will we be looking at the medical model that looks at fixing the individual rather than fixing the society. It promotes inclusive and accessible development, and it ensures national monitoring of the rights, hence the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities being established to ensure that the implementation takes place. So in overviewing the Act comprises 11 parts. I won't go into it, so I'm just providing an overview. Part 1 is a preliminary section, and it includes the interpretation of a number of definitions, a few of which are critical and we will look at later. And it also provides the objects of the Act, which I outlined earlier. Part 2 speaks about the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, its establishment as a body corporate, and its functions. The board of management that manages it, codes of practice, confidential register, and the registration of persons with disabilities. Under Section 9, in terms of the development of the codes of practice, the codes are done to provide guidance to the society as to matters under this Act, and they are practical guidelines to help us to avoid discrimination on the grounds of a person's disability. So the council, the previous council, drafted along with its stakeholders 3 such codes, and which the current council has to review, accept, lay them in the Houses of Parliament, and then they'll be available to the public. Those are the codes of practice for employment, code of practice for education and training, and the code of practice for healthcare and health facilities. Part 3, Section 15, speaks to the Disabilities Rights Tribunal. Its establishment, how complaints are done, dispute resolution procedures, and alternative measures. And the purpose of the tribunal is to hear complaints of aggrieved persons and settle same. The constitution of the tribunal is set out in the 3rd schedule of the Act. And what is important about the tribunal, the Disabilities Rights Tribunal, is that the awards are final and conclusive and can only be challenged on a point of law in the Supreme Court. And might I add that the Act also binds the Crown. Part 4 speaks to protection from discrimination. Part 5, the right to education and training. Part 6, employment, where it outlines discrimination against applicants and employees on account of their disability, the duty of the employer to make adjustments, and redeployment of employees. Part 7 speaks to political office and public life and the rights of persons with disabilities to be engaged in both. Part 8 speaks to health care and health facilities, and it guides health providers as to how to ensure the rights of persons with disabilities in this area. Part 9 addresses premises and housing, existing premises, new premises, alterations to leased premises, and discrimination in relation to premises. And many persons would ask, is it just premises as it relates to building? No, it is buildings, the space surrounding the buildings, sidewalks, anywhere that persons maneuver to make use of space. Part 10 speaks to public passenger vehicles and the responsibility for the state to provide public passenger vehicles so that persons with disabilities can traverse and do their business as everyone else. Remember, earlier I spoke about that there are times when we will have to make adjustments to how things are done to enable reasonable arrangements to facilitate the independence and participation of persons with disabilities. Public passenger vehicles and all the others is included in that. Part 11 speaks to miscellaneous matters, insurance, and we know the challenges with that, superannuity, and so on. Some imperatives of the Disabilities Act. Part 1, Section 2 of the Act is the section that deals with definition, as I said. And some of the key terms in the Act, and one of such is the word access. Now, access in the Disabilities Act refers to and includes the following. 1, access to premises. And it means freedom to enter in, approach, communicate with, make use of, or maneuver within any premises. Access also means access to benefits, freedom to make use of any benefits. And C, access to communicate. Access also refers to communication, the capacity to receive and make use of communication. Now, for full and effective participation and inclusion, that is, full and effective participation and inclusion is an imperative also of the Disabilities Act, because participation allows persons with disabilities to contribute to decisions impacting them and their communities. Inclusion means that the community and society should change and adapt to make sure that everybody can be part of it and contribute to it. Full and effective means across all spheres and scopes as it pertains to our society. Another key term is discrimination. And discrimination on the basis of a disability is when a person is excluded, prevented from doing something, or treated differently because of that person's disability. This exclusion prevents that person from exercising or enjoying all human rights and freedoms in the same way as other people do. Discrimination on the basis of disability also includes denying the person the changes or the adjustments that are possible to allow this person to participate. Sorry, let me read that again. Denying the person the changes or adjustments that are possible to allow this person in a particular situation to exercise or enjoy their human rights and freedoms in the same way as other persons do. And we spoke about reasonable arrangements. When persons with disabilities are discriminated against because they have a family member who have a disability, maybe you do not recognize it. If a restaurant, for argument's sake, is unable to facilitate a family who has a member who uses a wheelchair, then the entire family will not be going to that restaurant, or they're unable to go. They're unable to go to the movies, the entire family. So you see the impact, even economical, as we think about disability and inclusion. Now, reasonable arrangements, very, very important. It is the support or the changes that have to be made to ensure that an individual with disabilities in a specific situation can exercise and enjoy their rights. The Act does say that this support or change should not be exceedingly difficult or expensive for the person or organization involved. Now, this is a very tricky part of the definition, and in the Act it is called undue burden. And sometimes persons will look at disproportionate or undue burden, and sometimes persons will look at this and be happy that, there's this clause that speaks about disproportionate or undue burden. However, this is an aspect of the Act that must be proven before the tribunal. You can't just say, no, this is undue burden or this is disproportionate, so I can't do it. It has to be proven. So reasonable arrangements ensure that a person with a disability can enjoy or exercise their rights on an equal basis with others. And it ensures facilitation of such rights by the provision of auxiliary aids and services, including A, equipment or devices that alleviate the effects of a disability being experienced by a person. B, the acquisition or modification of such equipment or devices. C, duly qualified interpreters, technologies, and effective methods of making orally delivered and received materials available to a person with a disability. And duly qualified readers, taped audio-visually recorded text, or other effective methods of making visually delivered and received materials available to a person with a disability. On the screen, you will see some pictures of what we speak about when we say reasonable arrangements. And it takes us from the parking lot with the parking space that has a specific standard, and is important for us to remember that. And it also speaks to the entrance. And now I recognize that in the United Nations, the spaces, the encouragement is not to place the ramp at the back of the building while all of the other mechanisms are at the front, because that says something. But as far as is practicable and possible, allow the steps and the ramp to be close to each other, side by side if possible. The availability of sign language interpretation in a space, if it is there, and other signage to ensure that it is visible, that persons will know what is available for to acquire the service that they require. Notice the door handles. Very important in ensuring that there is reasonable arrangements. And the machinery or whatever else in the space to enable persons to utilize the space in a manner that upholds their dignity. So who is responsible for the effective implementation of this act? Many persons think that it is the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities all on their own. But no, everybody has a part to play. Government at all levels. The courts, parliament, independent monitoring frameworks, private actors, PSOJ, financial sector, Manufacturing Association of Jamaica, architects and builders, Jamaica Employment Federation, everyone, other actors, educators, health professionals, providers of support services. Even donors and international cooperation agencies have a role to play to ensure that whatever donations they're making to Jamaica, persons with disabilities are part of that plan. Organizations of and for persons with disabilities. So what are the next steps? To respect, protect, and fulfill our human rights obligations as duty bearers. Our obligations are to respect, refrain from interfering with the enjoyments of the rights of persons with disabilities, protect by preventing others from interfering with the enjoyment of those rights, and fulfill to adopt appropriate measures towards full realization of that right. So what can you do? What can I do? Simple. Work towards your premises being accessible. Learn sign language and appropriate language. So some things we're not to call persons with disabilities. Handicap is outdated, so outdated. Yes. Wheelchair bound is worse. Yes. Can I tell you? The person uses the wheelchair as his or her legs. They are not bound to it in any way, shape, or form. Employ persons with disabilities. Assist someone to register with the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities and to access its services. Engage persons with disabilities at your church, social clubs, social events, etc. And consider, for those of you who are innovators and builders, consider how you can make your products or services accessible to persons with disabilities. Some cost nothing. So in conclusion, the Disabilities Act exists to facilitate the basic human rights and uphold the dignity of persons with disabilities who are by right citizens of this country. If the implementation fails, we as a nation would have failed. Development status that we aspire to would remain an elusive dream. Let each of us commit to ensuring we play our part so persons with disabilities are included in society on an equal basis with others. Thank you so very much.
Give her a bigger round of applause for me, please. Thank you, Dr. Hendricks, for that eye-opener. In fact, we can categorize disabled persons as being part of the most vulnerable group, right, within Jamaica. And so we must treat them accordingly. And so we have to protect them. We have to ensure that we provide the facilities, right, Dr. Hendricks? So the Disabilities Act, now that it's in force, we have to ensure that public institutions, in particular, private sector as well, have ramps available for persons who may be visiting government offices or any private sector entities. So we have to ensure that we are not, as public institutions, infringing, and we provide the facilities so that we ensure that we treat with all persons who are disabled in a fair and equitable way. Now, I'll just open the floor for any questions at this time, if anyone wishes to pose any question. And of course, that presentation certainly is well received. I just want to use the opportunity to recognize a few partners. I did say the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, and the Permanent Secretary, Ambassador Sealy Monteith, is here leading from the front. Ministry of Justice, I did see Mr. Paul Bailey earlier. I don't know if he stepped out to return. Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport. Ministry of Health and Wellness. In particular, the statutory agency of the ministry, the National Family Planning Board. That's the statutory agency of the Ministry of Health and Wellness, represented. The Attorney General's Chambers, Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. The Planning Institute of Jamaica. Of course, Vision 2030 Secretariat, represented by Ms. Brian Lee, who is here. Very importantly, I'm seeing also Mrs. Lalita Davis-Mattis representing the University of the West Indies. I think you did teach me environmental law. So it's good to see you, Miss. Thanks for coming. It's good when the University of the West Indies is here for human rights, Faculty of Law in particular. So it's really good to see you, Ms. Davis. We also have UN AIDS, Mr. Javier Nelson, representing, but you're an advocate, a civil society advocate for other things, not just UN AIDS. Thank you, Mr. Nelson, for coming. And you see, when you start calling names, you end up in trouble because you may leave out some. The public defender. Now, the public defender's Office of the Public Defender plays a very critical role in keeping with the Public Defender Interim Act, and it's a good segue into the next presentation. And I will now ask Mrs. Kayla Beckford Harrison, Director of Investigations in the Office of the Public Defender. She will be supported by Ms. Simonia Denton, who is Manager for Management Accounts and Financial Systems. But just permit me to just give a brief profile on Mrs. Beckford Harrison. Mrs. Beckford Harrison was born and raised in the parish of St. Catherine. She is a past student of the Glenmuir High School and holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of the West Indies Mona campus, where she majored in political science and minored in international relations and social policy and administration. She also has a Master's of Science degree from the University of the West Indies Mona Salisis in governance and public policy. With 16 years experience in the public sector, Mrs. Beckford Harrison started her journey as a committee clerk at the Houses of Parliament and later advanced her career to become an investigator at the Office of the Public Defender. Now she is Director of Investigations. Mrs. Beckford Harrison is a believer in promoting and protecting the rights of individuals and currently serves as a Justice of the Peace for the parish of Kingston. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure in asking Mrs. Beckford Harrison to come forward. And as I said, she will be supported by Ms. Simonia Denton. The floor is yours, ladies.
Good morning, everyone. Mr. Wayne Robertson, JP, Ambassador Seeley Monteith, a fellow Glenmuirite, I might add. Yes. The Honorable Dr. Lloyd Barnett, my colleagues who are physically here, as well as those online, a pleasant morning. So I'm Kayla Beckford Harrison from the Office of the Public Defender, where I'm here today just to tell you a bit about what the office has been doing, what we hope to continue to do in advancing the human rights agenda. So I'll start by giving you a brief history of the OPD, as well as going into the work that we've been doing, the work we wish to continue to do, and how is it that everyone here can continue to assist us in advancing the human rights agenda. So the Office of the Parliamentary Ombudsman was established on November 13, 1978, created to investigate and remedy complaints made by members of the public of what is now termed as maladministration or bad administration by any government ministry, department, or agency while executing its functions. After investigations are complete, recommendations are made. Fast forwarding now to 1999, the Public Defender Act was passed and it came into effect on April 16, 2000. Therefore, the Ombudsman Act was repealed and the Office of the Parliamentary Ombudsman was replaced by the Office of the Public Defender. So with the establishment of the Office of the Public Defender, we were given additional functions, our jurisdiction was extended, and we are now investigating circumstances where citizens allege that their constitutional rights have been violated. So earlier I mentioned maladministration. When we speak of maladministration or bad administration, it refers to when a service takes longer than it should to be provided, and when attempts are made to have this resolved, there is no change. So I know a whole host of persons can relate to that experience. It also involves when a service is not conducted in the right and proper manner, when persons are not treated fairly, and when the rules, procedures are not being followed, and just in general, when the systems in place are faulty and not to the benefit of those who are using it. So just a brief outline of the first parliamentary ombudsman was Mr. Errington Green. That's from 1978. Then in 1991, Justice James Carr was appointed. Then in 2000, the first public defender of Jamaica, Mr. Howard Hamilton, QC, was appointed. He was succeeded by Mr. Earl Witter, QC. And then now in 2015, the country's first female public defender, Mrs. Arlene Harrison Henry, was appointed. And now in 2022, just in September, the first King's Counsel female public defender, Mrs. Caroline Reed Cameron, was appointed. So that's just a history of the leadership of the office coming to now. We have 3 locations currently, with our head office being in Kingston at 22 to 24 Duke Street. We have a central office in Manchester at the Annex Plaza, 7 Caledonia Road. And we're also in the Western region, shop number 18, St. Clavers Plaza, Montego Bay. So we are governed by the Public Defender Interim Act 2000, and I stress interim for the PS's heirs. So what can we investigate? Section 13(1) of the Public Defender Act states that we are able to investigate that any person or body of persons has sustained injustice as a result of any action taken by an authority or an officer or a member of such authority in the exercise of the administrative functions of that authority, or 2, has suffered, is suffering, or is likely to suffer an infringement of his constitutional rights as a result of any action taken by an authority or an officer or member of that authority. So those are specific to what we are able to investigate. But we are also, further down in section 13(2)(b) of the Act, we are precluded from investigating, 1, the commencement or conduct of any civil or criminal proceeding in any court of law in Jamaica or before any international court or tribunal. We are also not able to investigate any action done with respect to orders or directions to the Jamaica Defense Force or members thereof, or any proceedings under the Defense Act. Thirdly, any action in relation to the extradition of any person by the minister responsible for extradition, any decision or action of a service commission relating to the appointment, removal, and disciplinary control of any person, as well as the grant of honors, awards, and privileges under the National Honors and Awards Act. So if we are to assist persons, how are the complaints made? Complaints are received in the Office of the Public Defender via email. There are walk-ins. We are on social media, as well as just in watching the news or those matters that are of great public interest. The public defender is able to initiate investigations into those matters. So our main email address is inquiries@opd.gov.jm, and all our mails are acknowledged, and if we're unable to assist, that does not mean we won't respond. We'll just lead you in the right direction. On a daily basis, we have walk-ins at all 3 offices, and we have persons, information and complaints officers, those are the persons who conduct the interviews, get the information from the person who is lodging the complaint, and then from there, we will guide you along the process through writing, and we'll be in constant communication with you in terms of how it is that your matter will be addressed. On social media, we're on Facebook under the name Office of the Public Defender. We're on Instagram, OPD_Jamaica, and we're on Twitter at OPD_Jamaica as well. So at the end of our investigations, we are able to make recommendations, for example, that the complaint be re-examined, or that any faulty rules or laws which gave rise to the complaint in the first place be amended, or whatever policy changes we are able to influence to some extent that those policies. In some cases, we are able to get compensation, for example, payment of monies for any loss, any injury or abuse that was suffered. But we are also able to recommend that the persons the persons who are being complained against, we are able to recommend disciplinary action in cases such as those. So awareness now. From the office we are currently involved in a whole host of projects. Most of the legal fairs hosted by the Legal Aid Council, we are in attendance to those forums. So when the Legal Aid Council has their outreach programs, we are present. We are there we're there with our tents, we're there with our information and complaints officers, bringing the information to the people and to the community. So it's no longer a case where we're in the offices and you have to come to us, we will come to you. So that's just one way of us reaching out to the public. We have also been involved in the legal education exhibitions organized by the Office of the Chief Justice. And currently we are on Bridge 99 FM on Thursdays at 9:15, a 15-minute program live on air which is our Deputy Public Defender. We choose topical issues that the public would want to learn about, and we have discussions, and persons are able, we post it on our social media platforms, and persons are able to interact, as well as they can give their suggestions as to what are some of the issues that are out there that they really need to know about. So we are trying as best to bring the information to the public. We have also been involved in what we term as our Unfit to Plead project. This started in 2020 when we would have been getting a lot of calls regarding those persons who are in custody, and the persons, the public term them as just being lost in the system. So in July 2020, we started to assist those inmates who would have been in custody and they are deemed unfit to plead. So we visited the institutions, specifically Tower Street, St. Catherine, and as well as the South Camp Adult Correctional Center. We got the information through the Commissioner of the Department of Correctional Services, and we also collaborated with the mental health unit within the Ministry of Health as it relates to information for the mental health clinics and how officers assigned could be able to assist. We got the information through DCS. We visited the families because in most cases, what we wanted to do was to find out whether or not the families would be able to accept these persons and to continue treatment. We did that initially. That started in 2020. We did that, and then we rolled out a second phase of that project in 2021. The Legal Aid Council also partnered with us. In terms of bringing the cases back before the court, so that there can be some remedy on the part of the persons who were deemed unfit to plead. For the first project, we were able to assist 11 individuals. Then in 2021, in April 2021, we did a second phase because the persons would have been in and out of the institution. So we did a second phase of the project in April of 2021. We were able to find, for those persons who we could not locate relatives, we were able to find institutions that would be able to accept them. For those relatives who just couldn't accommodate them physically, we found accommodation with the family giving financial commitment to take care of them. One such institution was the Portland Rehab, and we had persons, missionaries of the poor, had also assisted us. We are in the third phase now of that project, so we are awaiting a current list from the department so that we can continue the work with the department. We have also partnered with the National Family Planning Board. Our last campaign was dubbed Know Your Rights, but with rights comes responsibilities. So you would have seen the billboards all over the island with Know Your Rights. There was one advertisement that was in prime time on the news with the police officer going into the premises with a search warrant. So we've also partnered with PROMAC in terms of patients' rights and health facilities, your rights at health facilities. Our work continues because we have also been doing presentations to JPs all over the island on their roles and responsibilities in the zones of special operations. One we have currently going now is collaboration with the Accountant General's Department, trying to validate thousands of local pensioners, trying to locate them to ensure that their information within the system is current. We also, just last week, in celebration of Human Rights Day, we did a series of school visits. We visited Tivoli Gardens High School, we visited Denham Town, we went to Knox College, Herbert Morrison. We did about 7 schools in total, telling them about, under the theme for International Human Rights Day. And we basically highlighted their rights under the convention. And then now on Saturday, on the actual day, we were in Manchester, and we were also in St. Elizabeth. Young people would call it, we did a flash mob where we went to the bus parks and we brought information to them, and we had tokens, and it was well received. So we That was our contribution in terms of advancing human rights. And our most recent presentation to the Kingston and St. Andrew JPs was a sensitization session held at the office, our head office, just outlining to them their continual role and function as justices of the peace. So the Office of the Public Defender, we hope to continue our work, and in so doing, we have a vision, we have a mission, and we have a strategic plan that we want Jamaica to know that we're here. Nothing is stopping us, and we're continuing our work. Ms. Denton, who is the money lady, she comes now to tell you how we plan to continue this mission and the vision of the Office of the Public Defender.
Yes. All protocols observed. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. The vision of the Office of the Public Defender is to be the premier investigating institution, seeking redress for all where appropriate for the acts of maladministration and violation of constitutional rights, while striving to build social justice, social cohesion, and equity for all. In carrying out that mission, we wish to investigate allegations of constitutional rights violation and complaints of maladministration, and to seek redress where appropriate. Our strategic objectives in advancing the human rights agenda is to improve the image of the office so that we can be more visible to the public to promote constitutional rights and responsibility. Mrs. Beckford Harrison spoke about being in the schools, being in the bus parks, and collaborating with stakeholders. We would also like to allow members of the public to have easy access to OPD, and so we plan to digitalize our services. So walk-ins can now go online and access all our services. OPD, Madam Dr. Hendricks would have loved to hear that OPD is allowing our services to be accessible to persons with disability. Our current home does not allow or conform to that act, and so we are looking to relocate. The OPD has also been more effective in its investigation, and we want to continue that and promote that in a timely manner. And as such, we're seeking to increase our human resource capacity in our investigation and special projects unit. The OPD also wishes to comply with local laws and observe international obligations and best practices. We want to register with OIC, become DPA compliant, ISO 9000, which focus on quality management standards. 001 focuses on information security. In closing, OPD in advancing human rights will seek to collaborate with all our stakeholders to prevent constitutional breaches, to build social justice and cohesion, and to attain equity for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies, for that presentation. Certainly hope that we are clearer as it relates to the role of the Office of the Public Defender, a very important entity, and you certainly play a very important role. We're talking about human rights. We can't talk about human rights without having regard to the work of the Office of the Public Defender. So we salute the office for its continued hard work. And let me just say, since I've been at the helm, I've been in various fora, and this thing comes up ever so often, the establishment of a national human rights institution. And there are various theories that I have been privy, that I have heard, as to its establishment. The ministry has not yet established a settled position. We have not yet arrived at such a position, and so it will take a few more months for us to settle. Just to say that we are cognizant of the need for a national human rights entity in keeping with the Paris principles. So just to say that whenever we are in meetings, that often comes up, and the Office of the Public Defender is also referenced. So I am assuming that many of our stakeholders are saying, but the Office of the Public Defender is best placed to so do in terms of carrying out the functions. But as I said, we have not yet made any pronouncements on this NHRI. Stay tuned for that, because we have it at the top of our radar. Are there any questions in relation to the presentation by the Office of the Public Defender? Or it was crystal clear and you need no further clarifications? All right, at this time, we'll have a very light moment. Our saxophonist. I gather it's my namesake, Mr. Robertson, no relation. So he must be good then. So we sit back and listen the wonderful music that will be delivered by our saxophonist, Mr. Robertson. Over to you, sir. Thank you so much for that. Very soothing. I was just getting comfortable listening to music, and then I had to get off. But thank you for that. That was quite something. Makes me want to learn how to play that instrument. I think I'm going to have some classes soon. But thank you, sir. Thank you for that. All right, so we move on, and actually we're doing very well with time. I'm happy to report, based on the agenda, Session 2, Human Rights, the Sustainable Development Goals, and Vision 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is scheduled to commence at 11:58. We are now at 11:41, so we are ahead of schedule, 17 minutes, which is excellent in the scheme of things. So, at this time, I will now call on Ms. Pisha Brian Lee, Director of Vision 2030 Secretariat at the Planning Institute of Jamaica. Just to introduce Ms. Brian Lee formally, she is Program Director in the PIOJ, Vision 2030 Secretariat. She leads that secretariat, which consists of a dynamic team responsible for coordinating the implementation of Vision 2030 Jamaica National Development Plan and the integration of the Sustainable Development Goals, we call that the SDGs, in its implementation. Ms. Brian Lee has a Bachelor of Science degree in International Relations and Sociology and a Master of Science degree in Sociology. Demography specialization was actually her focus with respect to the MSc degree. She has spent over 20 years in working in development planning, implementation, research, and teaching. She has also served as a project manager and community development practitioner, development researcher, and economic development officer in a non-governmental organization. She was also a senior statistician at the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, STATIN, a learning facilitator at the University of the West Indies, Mona and Open campuses. She has contributed to several reports and publications on themes such as crime and safety, gender, and adolescent development, and is also co-author with Dr. Herbert Gale on Males and Tertiary Education in Jamaica 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure in now asking Ms. Pisha Brian Lee to come forward to make her presentation. Give her a nice big round of applause, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Okay, so I have to adjust the mic because, you know, some of us, universal design is very much important to us. Height, the height issue, it's okay. So, okay, so good afternoon again, colleagues, and I just want to acknowledge P.S. Robertson and the Honorable Dr. Lloyd Barnett at the head table. Of course, thank you all for listening, those online, and thank you for being here. And we're just going to have a quick chat about Vision 2030 Jamaica as it relates to the human rights approach within the National Development Agenda and also in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals. So we will be looking at terms of the areas of focus: rights-based approach to national development, rights-based approach in Vision 2030 Jamaica, and considerations and the way forward. So Kofi Annan, former head of the UN, said the human family will not enjoy development without security, will not enjoy security without development, and will not enjoy either without respect for human rights. Okay, so the rights-based approach to national development recognizes the right of all to inclusively and equitably participate in and benefit from development. But it also recognizes that our rights are value-based and that they are informed by ideology and political decision-making. And what that means is that the rights of any society is based on what the people in the society at a particular point in time think are right, and within a process of democratic governance, it then means that it's based on the majority thinking. So a rights-based approach also recognizes that for rights to be experienced, they should be institutionalized, universal, and integrated in governance systems, stable, standardized, and predictable. And what that means is that if we are within the context of national development, for us to implement and have a rights-based approach, we must know what those rights are. Those rights must be entrenched, but there also must be systems and institutions for protecting these rights, telling us about these rights, and they must be predictable in that if my right is this today, my right should also be the same right tomorrow, and I should be confident that I will still have those rights. It also recognizes that rights are adaptive in response to the development environment and context, as well as crises. It does not mean, however, that adaptive means that our rights should change. So we should not have to give up our fundamental rights because there's crises, but we will have to adapt. Just like in COVID-19, when there were some restrictions on our movement, it did not say that we were giving up our right to go to the supermarket or to leave our homes, but because of the public interest, there were restrictions that were temporary and that were within the context of the law. So we had to make legislative amendments, etc., to facilitate that. And within a rights-based approach, that's what it means, that nobody gets up and says willy-nilly that this is what should happen. Okay, so I won't read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that has been so much referred to today, but I will simply say that this declaration speaks to not just the importance of freedoms and fundamental rights, but that there is a process to this, and that it happens over time and there is progression. So we don't usually find that our rights are immediately, in terms of all the rights we want and protected, are immediately achieved. It usually happens over time and happens through negotiation. As a people, we negotiate those rights. All right, so I must be very weak because I'm not getting this thing to move. So in Vision 2030 Jamaica, and it is our country's first long-term national development plan that covers the years 2009 to 2030, those 21 years. Our rights are very much represented in the development results we want to achieve. So the goals we want to achieve, the outcomes we want to achieve are rights-based, and the documents that we utilize, the systems and the processes are rights-based, in that it's not just about the fact that we are entitled to development, but it's also about a process that says we should participate in the development. So the development of the National Development Plan and the medium-term socioeconomic policy framework, which facilitates implementation, are participatory. They're evidence and results-based, so they're focused on responding to our sustainability and inclusion needs. And there is about transparency and accountability. So we report on performance, report on our processes, and as we all know, that is also a participatory process, because when we report that we do not do well, the citizenry does get engaged. When we report that we do well, the citizenry does get engaged. But that's about a rights-based approach again, as well, that persons have the right to information and to have a say in the development process. So Vision 2030 Jamaica also serves as the mechanism for implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. Okay. All right, so I killed the technology, so I'll just continue. So the Sustainable Development Goals, as I said, are being implemented through Vision 2030 Jamaica. And what that means is that we have these universal goals that speak to equity again, sustainability, leaving no one behind, and of course, reducing poverty, all of those things. So it speaks to the social, economic, and environmental spheres of development, just like Vision 2030 Jamaica. But when you look at the means of implementation, it states that the SDGs are to be implemented through national development plans. So what it does, it allows each country to operationalize how they approach the goals within the context of not just their values, but also their capacity. So whilst there are global targets, countries are also able to articulate that these are our country targets based on what is feasible, based on where we are and where we know we can be by 2030. But the SDGs does bring us all together in speaking a common language about development. And the good thing is that when an assessment was done in 2016, we were shown to be 91.3% aligned. The last time we did an assessment, we were over 98% aligned because we are focused on continuous improvement. So within that context, the SDGs and Vision 2030 Jamaica are very much aligned. When we implement Vision 2030 Jamaica, we are implementing the SDGs. So the implementation of Vision 2030 Jamaica requires the participation of everyone. The medium-term socioeconomic policy framework is implemented through the corporate and strategic business plans, corporate and operational plans of ministries, departments, and agencies, NGOs, private sector, and our international development partners aligning their country programs to the MTF, which most of our key international development partners already do. So when we think of how do we operationalize the rights-based approach within the National Development Plan, we do go back to the concepts of duty bearers, right holders. Now, the duty bearers within the context of national development, whilst it speaks to those who are responsible for conceptual designs, those who speak to legislation, etc., the leaders, the fact of the matter is, and it was mentioned earlier, that we all are duty bearers. In the national development process, we all have responsibilities. And if we think of as something like governance, we see that in that if we all do not abide by the rules, what happens to the rules? They no longer make sense. So even if we say we believe in something, if we do not abide by the rules, then the rules do not count, and the rights that those rules protect are no longer protected. And I think most Jamaicans can relate to that when we get very upset in traffic when someone goes on the other side of the road. And it happens a lot. So in terms, and again, so because we all are duty bearers, we all are rights holders as well. And the civil, political, economic, social environment facilitates how we access these rights. So within any society, persons do access rights differently. When you focus on sustainability and inclusion, you're focusing on how do we ensure that we bring the society so that everybody accesses these rights in the same way and are equitably treated. So, there are many considerations when we're thinking about a rights-based approach. So you see that word cloud there, it just has a few of the issues. We think about equity. We think about our rights-based approach being people-centered, so we have people at the center. We think about human rights norm building. We think about human rights compliance. We think about legislative coherence, ensuring that our laws are coherent so that when they're implemented and protecting our rights, one does not undermine a right by protecting another right. We think about gender equity and equality, as I mentioned, transparency and accountability. And we do think about transformational leadership, which our previous presenter has a PhD in. And we also think about things such as just civil society participation, etc. But all of these concepts are overlapping. And one of the key, and so when you think about human dignity, political, your fundamental freedoms, etc., and those are the issues that we oftentimes think of when we think of human rights. But one of the areas that we also need to think about is change. Our human rights are very much linked to change and development. Our human rights cannot stay static, and because the development process is about change and improvement. So when we think, and I'll go back to some of the earlier issues mentioned, in a rights-based approach to national development, we are not thinking of pulling people up. We're certainly not thinking of treating rights as those powerful bestowing rights on others. We are thinking about empowerment and enablement. So if it is that you are focused on a rights-based approach, how do you empower the citizenry to be able to themselves engage their rights and operationalize their rights and achieve their rights? You're also thinking about the enabling environment. Does the environment facilitate the rights that we say are accorded to all Jamaicans? So within the National Development Plan process, you are thinking about how it is that each person can participate in the process and the environment facilitates that. We're also thinking about multidimensional justice. So multidimensional justice affords everyone the right to equitably participate in and benefit from all aspects of development. And what does multidimensional justice mean? It means that we're not just speaking about the courts, the laws, etc., but we're speaking about every single tenet of development. So we're speaking about education, we're speaking about social protection, water, transportation, jobs and earnings, shelter, land tenure. Every aspect of development, we are looking at it as an element where justice should be achieved, which means there should be balance and all of us have equitable access to tenure, etc., education, and equitable access to the benefits that comes from participation in these. So we belong to, it's gone again. We belong to groups, but we are also unique. So what that means is that in a human rights-based approach to national development, we're not just thinking about group rights. So for example, with education, if you think about the approach to the pathways, in terms of pathways in education, what we're thinking about is not just that you can group students together, but how do you meet the unique needs of the students. Now, these are oftentimes ambitious in developing countries, but the whole idea is that you work towards it. So we may not be at the stage yet where every student can have their individual needs addressed, but that's what you want. You want a system that is so designed that the unique needs of students are addressed, whether it's a student with disability, whether it's a student that is talented in a non-traditional way, like you see those two persons dancing, but it's still a talent, and they could be geniuses at dancing. It's about getting everyone to their full potential and recognizing that persons are in fact unique. So when we also think, so when we're looking through a rights-based approach lens, we also think of, and I'll give you an example, a healthy and stable population. So Vision 2030 Jamaica integrates population considerations, including its dynamics and structure, which means fertility, mortality, and migration, into national development planning to ensure that the transformation of the society is responsive to the needs of the population. So it should advance the realization of an improved quality of life for all Jamaicans across the social, economic, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development. The state, in fulfillment of its duty, has aimed to adopt appropriate legislation, policies, and implement programs to ensure the realization of established human and development rights. So, for example, the Ministry of Health and Wellness, in fulfillment of its duty, has aimed to adopt appropriate legislation and policies. So if we look at access to primary health care in terms of having more health centers, so that primary health care is also not just linked to my access in terms of close to my home with a health center, but it's also about supporting preventative health care. so that again persons are more involved in their healthcare decision making. It also supports better health seeking behavior, because if the health center is closer to your home, you're more likely to get there. It also supports the elderly, the aging population that we have, because then if you're older, and I know this audience is not in that age group, but if you're older, I'm assuming everyone can relate to the fact that you certainly do not want to drive, take 3 buses to go to the health center. You want to ensure that it's close by. And the fact of the matter is, these are oftentimes the things that we don't see as human rights. We just think that, well, that is something I should have good health care. But it is, in fact, a part of your human rights, and it's part of a rights-based approach. So, and then the rights are interconnected. So my right to health is connected with my right to social protection throughout the life course. It's also linked to my right to food. Can I be healthy if I don't have food? And also, if I'm going to be involved in preventative health care for myself, shouldn't I at least be educated so I can read something? I mean, how am I going to know that something's a sugary drink if I can't read it? So, all of these rights are interconnected. And so, you know, sometimes persons say to us, Vision 2030 Jamaica seems too grand, it's too broad, it's trying to touch everything. We do agree that we have to prioritize within the areas, but if we say, okay, healthcare can stay back because education is more important now, or we have a pandemic, so healthcare is important, so you know what, security is not so important because we need to make sure people live. The issue is we don't have the option of making those kinds of choices, because as people, we are holistic beings. As the young persons in here, I'm sure that you, like, well, I won't assume, but you want to party as well as go to school. So the whole idea is that the entire ecosystem of our rights are interconnected, and they have to be protected in that way. We also have to think about the global relationship with our rights, because the fact of the matter is we may have rights here that we do not have overseas. For example, there are migration conventions, etc., globally that Jamaica has bought into. We actually have an international migration development policy that's considered a global best practice. So Jamaicans have rights here, and please note, when persons come here, they have those rights as migrants. Yet Jamaicans who migrate to a lot of the developed countries, persons may be surprised, have not signed on to those same conventions. So our rights, in terms of our human rights and the protection of our human rights, which is why it's so important that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade is involved, is because the diplomacy, the international discussions are important, because we are a migrant people, many of us, that's the reality. And any which way, even if we don't move to live, we like to travel. Jamaicans are known for flair, and we are a global brand, so we are going to interact with other spaces. So the whole idea of our human rights also takes into consideration what is in the global space and what kind of presence and say we give ourselves in those spaces to protect our rights. And again, all of that is in the National Development Plan. And I didn't go through like the goals and the outcomes, because I wanted it to be more relatable so that we understand that what is in the plan is all about our lives. It's nothing up there and airy-fairy. Sometimes the words sound a bit technical, but it really is about the lives that we want to live and the rights that we want to be protected. So I'll give you, all right, so this thing and I are not getting along. I'll give you another example. So if you look at water as a resource, and we're looking at the results. So we see under goal 1, Jamaicans are empowered to achieve their fullest potential, that water is good for health. Then we look at water as a right, because goal 2, the Jamaican society secure, cohesive, and just, is the goal that directly addresses human rights, particularly under outcome 6, effective governance. It speaks to governance, it speaks to our rights, and then we think of water as a right. I have the right to be able to sustain my body with water. Then we go to goal 3, Jamaica's economy is prosperous. Water is an economic resource. And again, if I am involved in the economy, water becomes a right as a part of my ability to do my job and our economic well-being. But then water is also an environmental resource. So when we speak about environmental sustainability, it is also a part of that resource. So when we look at any simple little thing, it usually cross-cuts several areas and it speaks to several different types of rights that we have. And then to say, how does our role in rights-based national development? So we should participate in establishing the global agenda. I know sometimes persons say, what does that have to do with me? It has a lot. Because what happens in the global agenda, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals, we were part of the discussions, we still are part of the dialogue. If we are not a part of those decision making, then it means that what comes to us is basically what we have to accept. It also does mean that we work with our international partners. We ensure that there is alignment between their support and what the country prioritizes, and we promote that and we advocate for that. We also have to look at legislation, our participation in policy making, our participation in the political decision-making process, and policy strategies, etc., so that we also have a say in our rights. And just to say, one of our fundamental rights is the right to advocacy. And what it means is that if I feel my right is not being protected, I have the right to say it. And we Jamaicans always feel like we have the right to say it, right? Nobody has to tell us that. But we know that we actually have the right to say, this is my right, and I'm advocating for it. It doesn't mean that you're right because of the processes of a democracy and the whole idea of how we negotiate, that right will be recognized, but you do have the right to say, this is my right. We also have to think about partnerships when we're thinking about our rights. Fact of the matter is we can't do it alone. Not as entities, not as individuals. Partnerships is what secures us our rights, and it also gets others to understand why this should be a right. And I'm not just talking about the issues in terms of, I feel that this is a freedom that I should have. I'm also thinking about, for example, education. There may be a school that needs assistance. It may not have, we as a small country don't have all our resources. Partnerships help us to realize the rights, those various fundamental rights, the education, etc., through having technical assistance. And it doesn't have to mean just external. It could be within our own country, private sector, working with the government, etc. And it also is about remembering what sustainability and inclusion, I'll end here, means. Inclusion does not mean that we make a decision to include everyone, but tell them what it is that is good for them. Inclusion and leaving no one behind means that if you, and I remember giving this, we have this simple example that we have online. If you are going to feed children and you say apples are good for them and peanuts are good for them, they're healthy, so you give them, and you never investigated whether the children have peanut allergy, then what you give to them in the best intent does not work. So a big part of our national development process is ensuring that we examine, we have evidence when we make decisions, and that when we are implementing, which we do under Vision 2030 Jamaica, we continue to consult so that when the development results are achieved, our stakeholders can say, well, you can say this statistic say X, but how does this, has this really affected my life in the way it should? And I just want to close there by saying, I want to thank you for your time. We do have a website. We're on social media where you can get all of the technical information and also non-technical information. Thank you very much, and let us continue to work together to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business.
No, man, you have to do better than that. Yes, welcome. Thank you, Miss Brian Lee, for that. Lots of nuggets. Lots of nuggets for lunch. We don't need lunch. You have given us so much. Let me try my best to highlight some of them. Equitable access must be something that we are including in the forefront of our plan, placed in the forefront of our planning frameworks. National outcome through a rights-based lens is very important, as Ms. Brian Lee said. The interconnectedness of rights is something which has resonated with me. And Ms. Brian Lee had said, right to health connected to social protection, connected to right to food, for example. So we have to look at rights as being interconnected. So it's not set of rights over here and another over here, but we should look at the interconnectedness of those rights. And also looking at water as an example. Water is life, as the NWC says. And if it is life, it must be provided. So whether you are in Lilliput, whether you are in Bull Savannah, you should be able to access water. Free, I hear in the background. I know the NWC is ramping up its collection as we speak, so I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure about the free part, you know. Notice I didn't go there. I was tempted to go there, but if it is life, then it must be provided, and some feel it should be free. But you know how it goes, you know. So thank you, Ms. Brian Lee, and of course, Vision 2030 framework. That it's very important for all of us as ministries, departments, and agencies to be guided by this national development plan. At the end of the day, we all want to remain in Jamaica. That's why we're here, working so hard to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, do business. And I hear the Prime Minister often say to retire at the end of it. So yes, just to recognize our stakeholders who have joined via the various platforms. There are a few persons on the Zoom platform. I want to recognize you all for joining. Also on Facebook Live and YouTube Live, provided by JIS, of course. So I want to thank you all. I wish to just, based on our observations, Robert Blake on YouTube, he says, great job. It's good that we are citizens and we are able to listen and learn as we move forward. Thank you. You're welcome, sir. Gavin Willesey says, excellent approach, absolutely necessary. On Facebook, Linva Bennett is watching all the way from London. Some would say London. So greetings from across the world. Linval, thank you, Linva, for joining. Altia Cohen is watching from St. Elizabeth. Some call it St. Bess. Welcome, Altia. Thanks for joining. And so there are other comments coming in from Zoom. Loving this presentation. Well done, eye-openers. Indeed. A UCC student is also online. And thanks for joining. I'm sure, and I'm certainly hoping that this will help you in your respective exams or courses that you are pursuing. So thanks everyone for joining. We don't take it for granted that you have taken the time out of your very busy schedule, particularly on a Monday morning, going into the afternoon, to join us. Just to remind you of our theme, we are all in this together. My right, your responsibility. At this time, I'll now ask our saxophonist to come forward to entertain us. And this will be followed by feature presentation by the most revered constitutional lawyer, certainly in the Western Hemisphere, the Honorable Dr. Lloyd Barnett, OJ. But before we do that, we'll have our saxophonist to come forward. Thanks. have to do better than that. We need a virtual applause as well. Wonderful, boy! I tell you, some of us they're checking out our online options for music classes as we enjoy this lovely piece. Thank you so much, sir. Before I introduce Dr. Barnett, just to read the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedom, Chapter 3 of our Constitution, very important. 13.1a says, whereas the state has an obligation to promote universal respect for and observance of human rights and freedoms, 13.1c goes on to say that all persons are under a responsibility to respect and uphold the rights of others recognized in this chapter. And this is against the background of our theme as well. We are all in this together. My right, your responsibility. So while we talk about rights, we have to talk about the responsibilities that go along with rights. 13.3L of the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms again. And many persons may not know this, but it speaks to, and I'm sure Mrs. Davis would be happy to hear me highlighting this, the right to enjoy a healthy and productive environment, free from the threat of injury or damage from environmental abuse and degradation of the ecological heritage. Very often that is forgotten, that this is a right. It's often omitted from the conversations that we have, Ms. Davis. And so we want to use the opportunity to sensitize Jamaicans on all the rights contained herein. And so we are going to be having these conversations when we hit the road. But I will now proceed into the main presentation. The Honorable Lloyd Barnett, and I want to thank Dr. Barnett for taking time out to join us with this forum. We certainly can't have a conversation about Constitution and human rights without having Dr. Barnett being a part of that discussion. And we are very fortunate to have him in our midst. Dr. Barnett is, of course, a national of Jamaica and an attorney at law in Jamaica and several Commonwealth Caribbean countries. He has served as president of the Jamaican Bar Association, chairman of the General Legal Council, and chairman of the Caribbean Council for Legal Education, and is also chairman of Citizens Action for Free and Fair Elections, CAFE. Dr. Barnett can be considered the foremost authority on constitutional matters, certainly in the Caribbean. And it is my great pleasure in asking Dr. Barnett to come forward to deliver his presentation. Could you kindly give him a big round of applause? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. My friends present in person or far out in the outer space or the virtual space, I'm grateful to the Ministry for having invited me to participate in this important forum, which is just 2 days after the International Day for Human Rights. Sometimes we forget that it was a Jamaican that introduced the idea of having an international celebration, because the Most Honorable Hugh Shearer had recommended in fact, he recommended a week, and the General Assembly eventually accepted that we should celebrate it once a year on one day. So that I'm very honored to have been asked to participate. After suffering 2 centuries of slavery under the English settlers and the English slave traders, and 3 centuries of unrepresentative government, the black majority eventually obtained the human right to participate in the business of government. And this was only achieved through the heroic sacrifice and the visionary leadership of many, led by our national heroes. Eventually, in 1962, Jamaica achieved national sovereignty, and obtained an independent constitution. Through the inspired advocacy of civil society, this new constitution included a chapter on fundamental rights and freedoms. This advocacy was inspired by the principles expressed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which in one of its preamble later paragraphs states, "The peoples of the United Nations have in the Charter reaffirmed their faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, and in the equal rights of men and women, and have determined to promote social progress and better standards of life in a larger freedom." The draft in Mughal adopted by Jamaica was that of the European Convention on Human Rights, which had also been followed by Nigeria and Ghana, which preceded Jamaica to independence. This was in keeping with the spirit which pervaded our new nation, which, in its new national anthem, prayed that the Almighty would teach us true respect for all and strengthen us, the weak, to cherish. And in the national pledge undertook to use our faculties in the service of our fellow citizens and to stand up for justice, brotherhood, and peace. However, despite these laudable pronouncements and promises, our political leaders inserted in the new constitutional provisions a savings clause which not only preserved the common law, but also statutory rules which conflicted with or undermined the fundamental human rights declared in the new constitution. We have, since independence, had some changes and amendments to the constitutional instrument. In the 1962 Constitution, there was provision declaring the qualifications for registration as an elector and requiring that electoral laws shall be designed to ensure that so far as practicable, any person who is entitled to vote is given the opportunity to vote. At this time, the prescribed voting age was fixed at 21 years. As a result of delays in the registration system in the 1960s and early 1970s, many who had attained the voting age were unable to vote because they had not been registered when the elections were called. The right to vote was not included in the chapter on fundamental rights and freedoms at that time, so there was no effective legal method of protecting the right. In 1972, the prescribed age was reduced to 18. Reforms of the electoral system were introduced so as to provide regular revisions of the electoral list. In the Charter of Rights in 2017, the right of every Jamaican citizen who is qualified and registered to vote is included as an enforceable fundamental right. Fundamental rights in the new Charter are now stated in copious and comprehensive terms. In addition to the usual statement of the right to life and security of the person, the freedoms of religion and conscience, the freedom of personal movement, the freedom of association, the right to a fair trial, and the right to property. Additional rights not usually included in the constitutions of Commonwealth countries are now expressly provided for. They include such significant formulations as the right to equitable and humane treatment by any public authority in the exercise of any function, the right of every child to such measures of protection as are required by virtue of the status of being a minor or as part of the family, society, and the state, and the right of a person who is a citizen of Jamaica to publicly funded tuition in a public educational institution at the pre-primary and primary levels, the right to enjoy a healthy and productive environment free from the threat of injury or damage from environmental abuse and degradation of the ecological heritage, and the right of every citizen of Jamaica who is qualified and registered to vote. Now, there have been several new provisions in non-constitutional instruments. That is, statutory provisions have been made, which we sometimes forget, or that although they are not in the Constitution, they are in fact preserving human rights. So that the provisions which have been made to preserve the right to vote, for instance, which is critical to the democratic process and the foundation of our liberty, is now preserved by statutory provisions which establish a system which includes an electoral commission established with the responsibility for a wide range of matters relating to the electoral system, including the duty to establish policies for governing the registration of electors, giving directions to the Director of Elections on the performance of his functions, compiling and maintaining the register of eligible electors, approving political parties which are eligible to receive state funding, monitoring election expenditure by candidates, and so on. So that if we go on to some other statutory provisions, the rights of the child, this has been mentioned in passing by previous speakers, in respect of the fundamental rights of children to be treated as part of the family and with proper care. The Early Childhood Act, which came into effect in 2007, governs basic schools, daycare centers, and early childhood institutions, which now require authorization and the maintenance of proper standards. In respect of the protection of children against abuse and ill treatment, the Child Care and Protection Act was enacted in 2004 with the objects of promoting the best interest and safety and well-being of children, to recognize that while parents often need help in caring for children, help should give support to the autonomy and integrity of the family unit, and wherever possible be provided on the basis of mutual consent. And that the least restrictive or disruptive course of action that is available and appropriate in a particular case to help the child should be followed. So that by statutory provisions, arrangements have been made to recognize and to respect the rights of children. And a commission was established named the Children's Advocate. It provides for reports to be made and to be investigated by the Children's Advocate of any cases relating to the abandonment, neglect, physical or sexual ill treatment of children, and for the prosecution and punishment of offenders. It also provides for the making of proper arrangements for the care and protection of children who are in need of such care and protection. In 2009, a Child Pornography Prevention Act was enacted to prohibit the production of or distribution of child pornography and the using or involving of any child in the production of such pornography. In 1996, the Domestic Violence Act had been passed. It permits an application to be made to the court for the grant of a protection order or occupation order to a spouse, including an unmarried partner, who alleges that conduct has been used or is threatened by the other party to the relationship against the applicant, a child, or dependent. Removal of discrimination on the ground of sex. In 1975, the Employment Equal Pay for Men and Women Act was passed. It provides that the same rate or scale of remuneration for work must be paid by the employer without differentiation between male employees and female employees based on the sex of the employees. Thus, a regular form of discrimination against women was prohibited. The right to privacy. In modern times, the right to privacy has become a highly contentious issue. The development of electronic surveillance systems and the growth of scientific techniques of intrusion into the personal records and the private data have intensified the problem. Jamaica, as a party to the Economic Partnership Agreement, and in accordance with that charter, is obligated to establish effective legal mechanisms for the protection of each person's rights to privacy in relation to his or her personal data. This is particularly the case where personal data is involved, such as genetic or biometric data, physical or mental health condition. Various standards are prescribed, including a requirement for that personal data must be processed fairly and with the appropriate consent or authority in our new statute. Right to a healthy environment has been mentioned this morning. The maintenance of clean air and water are of particularly critical importance to the provisions of a healthy environment. The Watersheds Act, Protection Act, passed within a year of independence, provided for the Natural Resources Conservation Authority, with the approval of the Minister, to make regulations for ensuring the proper, efficient, and economic utilization of land in watershed areas with a view to promoting the conservation of water resources. It may introduce compulsory improvement schemes in relation to the use of land in the watersheds. There are provisions for compensating owners who suffer losses from such schemes. And then the Water Resources Authority was also established with the duty to regulate, allocate, and conserve and manage water courses in Jamaica, as a duty to establish water quality controls. And then there's also a Natural Resources Conservation Authority, which has the duty to take all steps necessary for the effective management of the physical environment of Jamaica, so as to ensure the conservation, protection, and proper use of its resources, and to promote public awareness of the ecological systems of Jamaica and their importance to the social and economic life of the island. To manage national parks, marine parks, protected areas, and to publish recreational facilities as may be prescribed. In addition, there are local government authorities and statutory corporations with power to undertake and control development, town planning, which also have the responsibility to protect the environment. The Clean Air Act was also passed shortly after independence, imposing a duty on the owners of premises where there are industrial works, the operation of which is likely to result in the discharge of smoke or fumes or gases or dust into the air, to use the best practical means of preventing the exposure of such noxious or offensive gas. And then I also mentioned the right to protection from inhumane treatment and to equitable treatment by public authorities. And the Disabilities Act is an important feature of this development, because it has the objective to encourage all Jamaicans to recognize and accept that persons with disabilities have the same fundamental rights as any other person, and to prevent discrimination against them. So I come now to what is probably the most challenging aspect of Jamaica's experience in these 60 years, and that is the right to life and security of the person. Historically, the protection of citizens' right to life and security of the persons was among the first and primary duty of the state. There were long-established common law principles protecting the right to life. Statutory provisions have been made which strengthen the powers of the government to fulfill this duty. The constabulary force provides for the establishment of a policing force, the members of which are sworn to see to the preservation of the peace by keeping watch by day and by night with the aim of detecting and apprehending offenders and bringing them to the courts. There are also powers for special and district constables to supplement the police force. The Defense Act, which was passed on the eve of independence, provides for the establishment of a Jamaica Defense Force. It is charged with the defense of Jamaica and with such other duties as may from time to time be defined by the Defense Board. As in other areas, there have been several statutory enactments designed to enhance the human rights provisions. In this case, crime-fighting capabilities of the security forces has been strengthened. Criminal Justice Suppression of Criminal Organizations Act, the Anti-Gang Legislation, DNA Evidence Act, the Gun Court Act, Interception of Communications Act, the Law Reform Fraudulent Transactions Act, the Offensive Weapons Prohibition Act, the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Terrorism Prevention Act, the Trafficking Persons Prevention, Suppression, and Punishment Act. So that we have had comprehensive constitutional guarantees of human rights, supplemented by extensive statutory provisions. So the question is, have we effectively realized human rights? As we have seen, there are comprehensive constitutional, statutory, and general legal provisions which protect or support the human rights of Jamaicans. There are also many institutions and authorities with the duty and power to ensure that we enjoy those rights. We have made substantial progress in establishing the legal framework and the agencies necessary for ensuring that Jamaicans enjoy their human rights. Yet, it is true to say that in many areas we have failed to achieve the objectives of the legal and institutional framework that we have established. We have continued during our 60 years of independence to observe, preserve, and even strengthen several fundamental rights, such as the freedom of speech, which through new electronic media technology has now been enhanced. The freedom of movement, which through increased transportation facilities has been strengthened, and the freedom of association, which through the growth of civil society and improved communications has been strengthened. Yet, as a nation, we have failed to take proper care of our children. Thousands of children who are registered as students are not attending school regularly or at all. The examination results have been more than disappointing. The Patterson Commission report has documented and highlighted great deficiencies. Discipline has deteriorated and violence in school communities has become commonplace. We risk losing a substantial segment of the upcoming generation to poverty and crime. We have striven to be the friendliest country in the world, but we are now portrayed as the murder capital of the world. We are at the top or near the top of the international table of per capita murders. In response to the escalating violence, we have chosen states of emergency as our foremost strategy. Apart from the dubious constitutional validity of treating SOEs as a permanent crime-fighting mechanism, its long-term effectiveness is at the best dubious. More than 20 years ago, in a presentation on the status and future of Jamaica's security and justice systems, I formulated the following propositions, which bear with me as I repeat them. Citizen security, though a primary responsibility of the state, can only be achieved with the cooperation of civil society. 2, the use of excessive force by the security forces and police brutality militate against the prospect for a police-citizen alliance in the fight against crime. 3, in order to establish the basis for this cooperative endeavor, the security forces must respect citizens' human rights and avoid conduct which will be regarded in the communities as unfair or partisan. 4, a well-tested method of creating the conditions for this cooperative method is the utilization of various forms of community policing. 5, corruption indulged in by politicians, public officials, or the police breeds contempt for public administration and the administration of justice, and all systems for the distribution of public benefits, jobs, and contracts must be fair, non-partisan, and transparent. Hopelessness, particularly among the young, rather than poverty, is an incentive to criminal activity, and therefore social and economic programs have to be developed and implemented so as to provide training and employment for the high percentage of unemployed persons, particularly youth. The influence of the criminal dons in the communities must be diminished by providing alternative support systems and positive role models. 8, all linkages between the political parties and criminal gunmen must be severed. 9, the electoral process must be so organized that intimidation and violence have very little prospect of influencing the results of any constituency. 10, human rights and the amicable resolution of disputes must become critical segments of the educational programs at all levels as well as in the communities. 11, the law and the rules of conduct must be fair and once established must be obeyed and respected by citizens as well as officials. 12, the machinery for preventing the infringement of the law must be efficient and the resources provided to the security forces to respond to infringements must be adequate. 13, crime detection and apprehension must be tackled on a more scientific basis with the use of modern forensic and technological tools and effective intelligence gathering. 14, the justice system must be reformed and modernized so as to reduce the delays and create public confidence in its efficiency and fairness. 15, rules of conduct for all the major participants in the programs must be established, clearly understood and monitored so as to ensure accountability and transparency. 16, the government must summon the political will to effect the necessary changes and implement the required programs. When I go back and look at this, maybe one or two have been accomplished. And after years of review and study of this problem, I can't change any of those recommendations. I concluded the presentation with the following words. One thing is clear. Jamaica can afford no further delay in tackling the problems of security and the administration of justice. The psychological effects of violence, its impact on the economy, and the sense of injustice and deprivation it engenders contribute to an unhealthy body politic. Progress is dependent on the creation of an atmosphere of tolerance, justice, and security, as well as a sense of urgency. 2 decades have passed since then, and except for the electoral system, we have not really moved forward, but only arguably backward, with having increasingly to resort to reliance on SOEs. In other areas, there have been some backward slide, or the least absence of forward movement. In respect of the mentally ill persons, they are mostly exposed to health and physical risk as they roam and sleep on the streets. In 1998, it was a major revelation that Ivan Barrows, a mentally ill person who had thrown a stone on a building and smashed the glass, had been detained in prison for 28 years. The authorities pledged that this would not recur. Nevertheless, in 2020, more than 20 years afterwards, it was revealed that another mentally ill person had been in prison for 40 years. In respect of the environment, Jamaican citizens have had to endure inefficient garbage collection, the fumes from fires at public dumps, the pollution of rivers by noxious substances escaping from bauxite facilities, sewage effluent in harbors and coastal waters, and polluting waste on beaches. All these problems, all of them, can only be overcome by a national effort in which the authorities collaborate with civil society in a determined effort to make progress, recognizing that success will only be achieved by measured and persistent strides. We don't want to make one step forward and 2 steps backward. We must now, before it is too late, join together government, political parties, the churches, civil societies, the private sector, educational institutions, artists, and entertainers in a combined effort to remedy the deficiencies, reverse the decline, and promote the effective, all-embracing realization of peace, prosperity, and human rights. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barnett. Thanks. That's quite a bit to chew on, to meditate upon. Are there any questions? I know we have our partners, our stakeholders on the platforms, and I've been trying my best to recognize them. Red Cross is also online, tuning in to support the mission and vision for human rights, education, health, and safety. That's from Janice Wisdom. That's Red Cross Jamaica Foundation. Kathleen Lowe. Wow, lovely music and very informative presentations. Ms. Roxy Nickel on Zoom. Thank you so much for today's forum. I've learned so much from the various presentations. I look forward to future informative presentations from the ministry. So we have persons who are on Zoom who have also joined via YouTube and Facebook Live, and we are trying our best to monitor those platforms so we can reflect what you have included in the comments section. So thank you for your comments. So Dr. Barnett has given us quite a bit to think about, and I'm happy that the minister was able to join us again for this segment, though she has cabinet. It is that important to her, so she found it necessary, saw it necessary to come back. But thank you, Dr. Barnett, for your presentation, sir, and your continued guidance, and we look forward to calling upon you for future support. Thank you so much. Again, any comments, questions? Okay, at this time I'll now ask our saxophonist to return. Minister? Minister wants to make a...
Just to say that I'm very pleased that I caught Dr. Barnett's presentation. Not that I thought it would be anything but excellent. I was intrigued to hear the reminders and the recommendations. And I note in particular the acknowledgement of the strides we have made legislatively, but that we have not realized the benefits as much. And I think a lot of our challenges are cultural, may not have been framed like that. And it will require another level of deeper dive to understand why do we go forward and then regress so far backwards that we cannot realize the gains that we have made. I was particularly struck by the number of recommendations made. And I think it is true that many things in Jamaica where sound recommendations have been made in the past, when you pick them up, they are so relevant today. And I know Dr. Barnett said that nothing has caused him to change those recommendations. And it's a little sad because the rights have been hard fought. And for a country like Jamaica with a very painful history of slavery and discrimination and abuse and excesses, we really have to talk to ourselves a little more and try to reason it out. Why, in spite of the lofty goals that we set, the shared interest, we're still not able to go beyond a certain point. Now, I'm a big believer in this nation and in the people, and I'm desperately trying to get a better understanding of why we are where we are. And certainly in the leadership that I'm called upon to exercise in government, it's to help the machinery of government at all levels to understand just how important it is for us to honor and preserve the rights. You know, I found conversation around human rights to be largely unhelpful because they have been framed in a combative way. But if you listen a little more closely, there is little or no divide in the goals that we are seeking to achieve. But how? And so we continue to pit segments of the society, government against the people, people against people. But I come to this forum hopeful that You know, we in spite of the slow pace, we have done a lot, and we can accelerate that pace to achieve the goals that we must achieve and that are critical to our humanity and the dignity of our person. So, Dr. Barnett, I want to thank you. You have been relentless, and it is my hope that the good Lord will spare your life to see that particular goal. Dr. Barnett has kindly consented to serve on the Constitutional Reform Committee, though he told me not to waste his time because he doesn't wish to be compromised with the stance he has taken over the years. And I have sought to assure him that know that, you know, the end of the tunnel is in sight. It cannot be that he's still around and not participate in a special way when we are going to achieve one of the many goals, but one that is critical. So for those listening, you're hearing one of the first members of the committee announced, though I have not yet announced the entire committee. But just to say thank you, Dr. Barnett, and thank you for assisting our ministry. Dr. Barnett has also been helping on the interview panel for our human rights expert, and I think the perspective he has brought just to ensure that our experts really meet a certain standard. I want to thank you.
We endorse what you have said, Minister. So that's breaking news, ladies and gentlemen. The first member of the committee.
Yet, but
officially, yes. Thank you, Minister. Thank you so much. And of course, thanks to Dr. Barnett for his presentation. Okay, at this time, I'll now ask our saxophonist.
If I may.
Yes, sir.
Ask for either questions or comments.
Oh, and you have a question. Wow, or a comment. Please, go ahead.
So I commend what is going on here. It's heartening that is happening. One is that I get a chance to get paid, and I appreciate that. But apart from that, my experience with human rights in Jamaica is that if it is that you are informed, you know how to defend it. And based on what I have been hearing since morning, especially from, is it Miss or Mrs. Lee? Miss Lee.
Miss Brian Lee, yes.
Miss Brian Lee, is that the context is that if you know how to protect your rights in Jamaica, you can protect it. But I appreciate the fact that we are informing more people. But the question that I want to ask is, if I am a Jamaican, an average Jamaican who is not related to an attorney, who is not related to somebody who is powerful in society, I don't know if I've heard, and based on the comments of the good doctor just now, I'm a little bit certain that I haven't heard that the human rights policy as it functions in Jamaica has teeth. Am I correct in interpreting the function thus far?
When you say it doesn't have teeth, could you expound on that?
So, doctor would have said that he would have listed a myriad of recommendations. And he would have said that over time, only 2 have come into place. My assumption is that the 2 have come into place because probably those 2 have reason to be forced upon or have reason to be put in place, but the other 2 the many others don't. So I'm just wondering what causes the many others not to be in place.
We'll allow Dr. Barnett to respond. Thank you for that. Both. We can ask both to respond. Yes.
For improvement, and I've always been. The fact of the matter is that it is not only, as I pointed out, passing laws, but it's implementing them. And your question is really at one stage of the implementation. How do people utilize the remedies which have been provided by the by the laws. And you heard from the public defender and from other organizations which have been established to assist, and there are human rights organizations which assist. But at the back of your question is a question of public education too. The knowledge of your rights helps you to decide how you protect it. And therefore, I think, forums like this and the work done by human rights organizations to try to educate persons are critical to the advancement that we see.
We are convened under a theme. We're all in this together. My right is your responsibility. Very often we focus on litigation to protect rights. But litigation really should come at the end of a process where everything else has broken down. And the truth is that if people do not behave responsibly to others, the rights that are guaranteed will never be enjoyed. You'd have heard, you'd have probably seen it reported, my saying that the way we have approached issues, it's as if wrongdoers know their rights more than their responsibilities. And I've just found it very unhelpful how combative we have been in the space, though I understand, because the truth is that our law books are replete with examples of excesses and abuse. But we also have a lot of successful litigation in the courts. So the court ultimately does do its part, but long before we get there, as Dr. Barnett pointed out, that we have a slow process, we have a huge backlog, and that will undermine confidence in how quick you can get the disputed issues resolved by way of a court process. But long before we get to court, the dispute arises in a relationship. And I don't think we have placed sufficient emphasis on that context. And this is not to say where the emphases have been placed that they are not important. But it's almost as if we have to go back to basic principles and first principles. We're just a society that, I've said we're a grievance culture. We carry grievance. The victim's trauma becomes an aggressor's trauma, and we leave little space for healing. Now, I have to tell you that since I became an elected MP, my perspective has broadened and changed in so many ways. Because when you go into constituency to meet your constituents, you see so much firsthand that a report by a reporter doesn't do justice to. And it begs the question, what are the goals of nation building if the very foundation of the society remains shattered and broken and fragmented as it is? And so I was heartened to hear Dr. Barnett's reminder of his recommendations around even school and schooling, and so many others. Dr. Barnett, I hope you will send us a copy, because I think we must have another conversation.
I said about what I said 20 years ago.
Well, imagine that. Imagine that.
But I can tell you what I said 30 years ago.
20 years later.
I said that the educational system was failing us.
Yes.
And that the minister had made a statement which he thought very progressive in relation to basic schools. And I was saying that, I made a public statement that this child psychologists tell you that people's mental attitudes become formulated by the time they get to 12 or so that you have to concentrate and put more resources there. And he responded by saying that I am some sort of evil prophet too, And I mean, I'm sorry that he was right, because the prophecy has come.
Well, we will not look at it as evil prophecy, but just to say that we have underestimated the blow that has been dealt to us by the economic decline and regression that we have experienced in Jamaica for decades. Because, you know, when you've had to pay 7 cents out of every dollar to service your debt first, leaving only 3 cents to deal with the many other things that you must provide for, you know, it really has been a major challenge for us as a society. And that part of the story has not been told. Because what it has done is that it has affected our capacity to implement the laws. So this ministry, as part of the new approach that it is taking across government, is for every law, we're taking a fresh look at what is required to implement the laws effectively, both institutionally and at the human capital level, including the perspective that persons bring to the job. So we have our work cut out for us, but just to say that we intend to do it together. So the partnership with civil society that you've spoken about, that is, we don't even have to argue that, because the work that has to be done by all of us. And the leadership will be exercised on different issues at different levels. But it is my hope that this ministry, with what is entrusted to it, will at least exercise the kind of leadership that makes true progress on the problems. And that is why we are here today. As pleased to hear Jamaica's part in having the celebration of International Human Rights Day. I think that may have missed me from the research. And no, you know, when I first came to political office, I served in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I have to tell you that every time I stepped out, I was so proud, because as I learned of the role that little Jamaica played on the international scene, and I just say, world, look out, because we're going to reclaim it, but we're going to put our Jamaicans and our people at the forefront as beneficiaries. We have done so well in contributing to a better world, a better international system. Time for our Jamaicans to get the benefit of all of that. So I believe we have it here, you know. I believe we have it here. So.
Well said, Minister. Thank you. Our saxophonist, we now ask you to...
And the saxophonist is going to perform with a special gusto, right? For his utter delight and pleasure for being here.
Indeed. We now turn over the floor. You can do better than that. A bigger round of applause. As I said, there we are all searching for some music classes. I don't know when will the course begin. Awesome. I'm always fascinated by saxophonists. Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, we are ahead of schedule. How many times we have an event like this and we can report that we are ahead of schedule? Can you imagine? So we are supposed to commence this presentation at 1:40 and we are now at 1:08 and lunch is ready. So we are ahead of time, not even on time. We are ahead of schedule. Excellent, excellent. So we continue. Our next presenter is Ms. Peter Gay Wilson from the Attorney General's Chambers. She's Crown Counsel. But before Ms. Wilson comes to the podium, let me properly introduce her to you. Ms. Peter Gay Wilson currently serves as Crown Counsel in the International Affairs Division of the Attorney General's Chambers. In her capacity, and let me just pause just to bid Dr. Barnett goodbye, and he has been here from morning. So we thank you again, Dr. Barnett, for taking the time to join us and to present. Thank you so much. In her capacity, she advises the government of Jamaica on various international law matters, including Jamaica's obligations under multilateral and bilateral treaties, international human rights law, international trade law, and measures to combat corruption. Ms. Wilson also represents Jamaica in regional and international meetings and is currently a member of the Inter-ministerial Committee on Human Rights. She was selected to represent Jamaica at the 50th session of the Human Rights Council and received training from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime on implementation of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Ms. Wilson holds a Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of the West Indies and a legal education certificate from the Norman Manley Law School. She also tutors at the Faculty of Law of the University of the West Indies. Ladies and gentlemen, all present here and in virtual space, put your hands together as we welcome Ms. Peter Gay Wilson to present on horizontal application of the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. As was mentioned, my name is Peter Gay Wilson, and I'm a member of the International Affairs Division of the Attorney General's Chambers. I really want to commend the work of the ministry thus far in this initiative. I think it's a particularly important discussion and conversation to have, and looking forward to working with the ministry. I know that we'll be working very closely. All right, so as was mentioned, my presentation will focus on the horizontal application of the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms. And interestingly enough, this touches a little bit on the question that was raised earlier about the teeth of the human rights aspect, because the horizontal application of the Charter provides an opportunity for citizens to be able to launch a constitutional application against another private citizen. And even though this is an aspect that touches on litigation, I think it's particularly important to know that just the provision that the Charter has to allow a private citizen to be able to launch directly a constitutional action against another private citizen is an indication of the government's commitment to advancing human rights. As mentioned, in 2011, the Constitution of Jamaica was amended to replace the human rights provision of the Independence Charter with the Independence Constitution, with the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedom. And the motivation for doing so was to provide for more comprehensive and effective protection for the fundamental rights for all persons in Jamaica. And one way in which the drafters and the government at large achieved this objective was to make express provision for direct application of the Charter in disputes between private citizens. But even before we touch on it, there is, I'm wondering if it's working here. Okay, right. There it is. So just wanted to underscore that even before we talk about the private citizens' dispute, it's important to know that the state primarily bears the responsibility of respecting, promoting, and protecting human rights of the people within its territory. And so in international law, states, for example, sign international human rights treaties which outlines specific rights that the government is obliged to protect, promote, and respect. And just as a matter, just to note that Jamaica is a signatory to 7 of the 9 core international human rights treaties. And I know that today probably the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was probably referenced a lot throughout presentations, but this particular important human rights document, just like other international human rights treaties, it is directed at states. So states, for example, in the preamble of this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there's this recognition that the member states have pledged themselves to promote the universal respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms. And we also see this obligation reflected in the Charter. So Section 13(1)(a) of the Charter mentions that the state has this obligation to protect universal respect for and observance of human rights. Now, Section 13(4) of the Charter outlines that it applies specifically to all law and binds the legislature, the executive, and all public authorities. So the Charter binds all 3 arms of government. And Section 13(2) specifically says that the rights are guaranteed and that they can only be subject to certain provisions of the Charter and only as may be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. Now, Section 19(1) of the Charter, which is often described as the redress clause, it outlines that if any person alleges that any of the provisions of the Charter, any of their rights under the Charter is or is likely to be contravened, then they are able to apply to the Supreme Court for redress. And so traditionally, claims were brought, as I mentioned before, by a citizen against the government. That was the traditional approach and what we understand as the vertical application of the Charter. And but I noted that the minister mentioned that for us as citizens, we also bear a sort of responsibility to respect the fundamental rights and freedoms of others in society. And we actually see this recognized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So there's this recognition that everyone, all of us, as a part of a community and as a part of society, that we bear this sort of responsibility or duty to respect the rights of others. And that in order for the rights to be exercised, that they must not prejudice the rights and freedoms of others. And this concept of us having this responsibility and this duty to respect the rights and freedoms of others is also recognized in the Charter. So Section 13(1)(c) of the Charter says that all persons are under responsibility to respect and uphold the rights of others, and that in order for these rights to be exercised, they must not prejudice the rights and freedoms of others. Now, Section 13(5) of the Charter, this is the particular horizontal application provision, and it says that this chapter, it binds natural or juristic persons if and to the extent that it is applicable, taking account of the nature of the right and the nature of any duty imposed by the right. And so as mentioned earlier, under this particular section, a private citizen is able to launch a constitutional action against another private citizen. Now, even though the Charter has been in force or in effect since 2011, there aren't many cases that deal with or discuss the horizontal application of the Charter, but 3 cases in particular discuss this, and we will speak about them just a bit throughout the presentation. One is Maurice Tomlinson against TVJ and CVM, Bain against the University of the West Indies, and the most recent case of Parkins and others against Carimed and Kirk FP Limited. Now, in Maurice Tomlinson and TVJ, against TVJ and CVM, in this particular case, Mr. Tomlinson, he sought to have a 30-second advertisement broadcasted on TVJ and CVM. Both are privately owned media companies. And these privately owned media companies, they took some time to respond to Mr. Tomlinson's request for broadcast, but he interpreted this lack of response as a rejection of his request for broadcast. And so he launched an application in the full court seeking a number of things. So first of all, he sought that the, sorry about that. He sought that the stations, he sought a declaration, from the full court that the station breached his right to freedom of speech, to his right to distribute or disseminate information, opinion, and ideas throughout any media. And he also sought that the court compel these stations, these privately owned stations, to broadcast the advertisement at applicable commercial rates. Now, in this particular case, the court, for the first time, made this declaration that Section 13.5 allows for horizontal application of the Charter. But the court also mentioned that the court looked on the wording of Section 13.4, which applies to the government, and the wording of Section 13.5, and they recognized that there was a clear difference. So if you look on it, Section 13.4 says that the chapter applies to all law and binds the legislature, the executive, and all public authorities. And then Section 13.5 says that to the extent that it is applicable, taking account of the nature of the right and the nature of any duty imposed by the right. So Justice Sykes, now Chief Justice Sykes, he underscored that for Section 13.4, it was clear that there was no limitation, meaning that there is no charter right that is not applicable to the government. But for Section 13.5, he basically said that the wording suggests that a charter right may not apply to a private citizen at all, and even if it does, it may not apply to the same extent as it would to the state. Now, I'm going to be focusing a lot more on what Chief Justice Sykes mentioned in his judgment. So he underscored that for direct horizontal application of the Charter, 3 things need to be considered. First of all, the content of the right must be determined. Secondly, a question needs to be answered on whether it is possible for that particular right to bind the private citizen. And lastly, if it is possible that the private citizen can be bound by this particular right, we need to have regard to the nature of the right and the nature of the duty imposed by the right. Now, for this first consideration, the content of the right that needs to be determined, the court, particularly in Maurice Tomlinson and TVJ and CVM, the court looked on what is the full extent of this particular right. Based on the facts, how is this constitutional right engaged? And the court, for quite a bit of the cases, for 2 of the cases, the court did mention that, for example, the right to freedom of expression, that it is capable of horizontal application. That means that generally it is possible for the right of freedom of expression to bind a private citizen. And I just also wanted to mention that Carberry J.A. in the case of Grant against Director of Public Prosecutions, this was a case that was litigated before the new charter. But Justice Carberry, he mentioned that even some of the human rights, some of the constitutional rights that we are discussing here, that some of them are even more likely to be breached by private citizens than the state. And Justice Carberry, he mentioned that rights, for example, like the right to life, the right to freedom of conscience, the right to freedom of assembly, these are rights that are capable or have the potential for horizontal application of the Charter. And I just wanted to mention also that in Bain against University of the West Indies, the court also mentioned that the right to freedom of conscience, thought and belief, and the right to freedom of expression, that this could be applied horizontally. But interestingly, the court also underscored that the right to due process, this was not capable or amenable to horizontal application. Now, secondly, the second ground, if the right is capable of binding the private citizen. For this particular consideration, the court will ask, based on the facts of the particular case, does the right bind the private citizen in the manner claimed by the claimant? Now, in Maurice Tomlinson against TVJ and CVM, Chief Justice Sykes, he mentioned that while freedom of expression is capable of horizontal application based on the particular facts of that case, it was not possible for it to be directly applied to the privately owned companies in the manner in which the claimant alleged. And he underscored that this was because freedom of expression did not extend to the privately owned resources of a company or a person to be used to, for one to express themselves. And so the court looked on how far does the right extend to. And the court made this sort of pronouncement that while we have this right to speak, while we have the right to express ourselves, this did not extend to using another person's platform in order to express ourselves, right? And so the last one, that if it can be concluded that a right can extend to the private citizen, we need to have this consideration as to how far can it extend to the private citizen. We need to look on the nature of the right and the nature of any duty imposed by the right. And this is where I think the horizontal application of the Charter gets a little tricky. Because when you think about the horizontal application of the Charter, it's very different from the state. Because we know, as I mentioned earlier, the state bears its primary responsibility. But for us as citizens, we also have rights. And so usually in litigious matters, there is this balancing of competing rights. Because on the one hand, when I am saying that you are breaching my right, there's a potential that the way in which I am alleging that you are breaching my right, I might also be breaching your right, right? And so the court has to go through this sort of balancing exercise. Because remember, we mentioned earlier that the Charter underscores that while I have a right, you also have a duty to respect this right. And also the way in which I exercise my right, it must not be done in a way that prejudices your right. Right? So as I mentioned earlier, constitutional claims, they usually involve competing rights, sometimes the same rights. So for example, in the case of Maurice Tomlinson against TVJ and CVM, while Mr. Tomlinson on the one hand had the right to express himself, had the right to speak, these privately owned companies, they also had this right to freedom of expression. And this also included the right not to say anything at all. And so the court came to this sort of conclusion that they could not hold these private citizens, that the right to freedom of expression could not extend to them because it would amount to a prejudice to their rights. Because if the court concluded or adjudicated in the way in which Mr. Tomlinson wanted, then this would basically compel these private citizens to use their own privately owned platforms or resources to basically advance Mr. Tomlinson's cause. And so the court thought that the best way to balance this right was not to extend Section 13.3, the right to freedom of expression, to this private citizen, and which is the privately owned media companies. And I just wanted to... Right. So this is just the pronouncement that was made by Justice Sykes, that Section 13.3c and d, which is the right to freedom of expression and the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and belief, does not give any private citizen the right to use another private person's property to disseminate any message. What Section 13.3 does is give the person the right to disseminate his message by any technological means available. But no private citizen is under an obligation to make specific provision to enable Mr. Tomlinson or any private citizen to express himself. So that is the extent of my presentation for today. Yes.
Since I have to run, I'm so pleased that I stayed on for a good presentation. But here's the point that I'm going to make now. I have said repeatedly, we have a joint select committee of the Parliament reviewing the new bail law, and I expressed my disappointment at the allegations of unconstitutionality without the analysis. And what Peter Gay has done on one side is to show that you can't just allege unconstitutionality. And the courts here in Jamaica have provided good guidance in the case law as to the approach that you have to take in order to arrive at the conclusion based on what is in the Charter. And you know, when lawyers come to present, I really expect a scholarly presentation like Peter Gay's, with an analysis showing how the authorities have come to the reasoning and the conclusion, because we are in an era of rights. And I celebrate rights, But as our theme says, my right is your responsibility. And no clearer is that brought out in the balancing approach that the court has taken and provided guidance for the rest of us. Thank you, Peter Gay. Happy I stayed on. I will have to run. It's such mixed emotion for me that we're doing it today when I'm not able to be fully present for the engagement. But internal in the ministry, we have weekly robust discussion on the approach that we want to take in this specially carved out area. And I say to Jamaicans, be assured that when we come to you, the public, in whatever forum that we engage with you, we come after much thought and deliberation and research. Nothing we have presented in this ministry so far has come superficially and without recognition to the competing interests and the competing claims. All right? So much more is to come by way of engagement. Thank you.
Well said, Minister. Well said. Thank you so much for that eye-opening presentation, Crown Counsel Wilson. I'm really hopeful that all the persons who have joined, whether it is YouTube, Facebook, or other platforms, that meditated upon that presentation and recognize how they can, bring a matter before the court if they so desire. Because that's part of the process, for people to know their rights and how they can action all of that. So it is very important.
Just to say that the fleshing out of what is provided for in the Charter still needs to be done. Although the redress clause at 19 provides a direct route, a constitution is meant to be shielded from instability. And there is usually different stages at which you litigate the rights. So we still have a lot of work to do around the Charter. We also still have to tidy up some of the language used in the Charter because of just how it's drafted. And as the courts have rightly said, when they begin the process of interpreting provisions, they start with the words actually used. And we always have to take great care that the words used reflect the policy intent behind the provision. So I have said that we will have to go back to the Charter, and many have gotten very antsy about it because we operate with such high level of distrust. Sometimes even when you're taking steps to realize a shared goal, people are decrying it without interrogating what exactly are you seeking to do. All right, I hope PS will be feeding everyone well, present here and those who have joined us online.
Yes.
I hope you will have something to feed yourself, because were you here with us in person, you would have been well fed.
Yes.
We have in the audience here a gentleman who always posts about food and being hungry. I will call no name. I hope that his presence here will not cause him to have to post anything about what he'd like to have for lunch. But that his palate would have been truly delighted from what is provided. You see, I throw me on what the saints.
Yeah. Minister, we haven't yet figured out the solution for providing lunch online. We're still working on it, and we're hoping that the next consultation will provide that solution.
Work in progress.
But we have the in-house lunch.
I'm also so pleased to see Mrs. Davis Mattis here.
Yes, indeed.
And all others. Many of us have taken long journeys, even though we don't talk about it. And in what we're fighting for in the cause of justice, whether it's the environment, whether it's racial issues, whether it's any form of discrimination, and we get labeled. When me talk, me not take it back, because me usually talk based on principles that I hold near and dear, right? Even if people disagree with me. but just to know that in this ministry, our aim is beginning with government, because a different responsibility is placed on government, is to ensure that the machinery of government treats its people the way that will enable them to enjoy the rights that are guaranteed. And then we help people to people in treating each other well. All right, on that note, me gone.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are winding down. We are at penultimate item before closing. At this time, I will now call upon Mrs. Caroline Temple Anderson, Director, Enabling Environment and Human Rights at the National Family Planning Board, under the theme, We Are All in This Together, the National Family Planning Board's perspective. But just to properly introduce Mrs. Temple Anderson. Mrs. Caroline Temple Anderson is the Director of Enabling Environment and Human Rights at the National Family Planning Board, a statutory agency of the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Her greatest passion is assisting and supporting individuals to think outside of the box and grow into the best version of themselves. She holds a master's degree in communication for social and behavior change, as well as a bachelor's degree and diploma in education. Over the years, she has had the privilege of working in non-government, government and private sector organizations in the fields of education, social development, health, and insurance. She currently holds the position of Director, Enabling Environment and Human Rights, as I said, at the National Family Planning Board, and is also an inspirational speaker and author of the book, Self-Nurturing Thoughts, 7x7. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure in welcoming Mrs. Caroline Temple Anderson.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So, International Human Rights Day. No, you're not going to. I am not going to be one that struggles with the technology. I refuse. There you go. All right, got it. So we've talked a lot about the framework in Jamaica, and now I just want us to check our history. So I have the hardest task to actually leave you feeling on a high, so I'm going to do just that. All right, so let's check our history. When we look at our history, right, what we don't know is that before 1948, in 1920, the history shows that a people without the knowledge of their past, their history, and origin is like a tree without roots. Our great Marcus Garvey. And he was among the person, one of the most remarkable human rights declarations that ever happened was in 1920. And it was produced by civil society. We have been talking a lot about the importance of civil society. And this civil society organization was led by a Jamaican. Our importance. The whole thing with South Africa, we were right there. And as well, Bob Marley, right there. We have been doing this for others, so we need to do it for ourselves now. Again, so we have in our history Jamaican hero, human rights icon. Can't go wrong. It's already in our blood to get this right. So, international guidelines. So my presentation will literally guide you what you have heard from the beginning to now to wrap. So international guidelines are there, and that's how we start our framework around human rights. A part of the international framework, you have the International Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And you have heard a lot about that as well. And there is a video. No. Video? Play? No? You see? It's playing with me today. All right, so there is a video that talks about human rights and how we got there, and I'm going to just move on. So international conventions, you have also heard many of them said before. So the framework is that foreign affairs was here. They actually sign on to international declarations and conventions and agreements. After they do that larger framework, the wider framework, they now take it to Jamaica. And one of the biggest things that we have is the umbrella, which is the Constitution, which was just explained as well, to let us understand the guiding laws. So the Jamaican Constitution are the principles upholding the rights and freedoms of all. That's what it is. These rights and freedoms are guaranteed regardless of race, color, place of origin, class, gender, religion, or political opinion. There are 10 chapters. All right, and you'll realize that chapter 3, which has been mentioned throughout today, is the fundamental rights and freedoms, which guided by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so I'll go a little further in it by saying fundamental rights and freedoms, right to life, right to personal liberty, all these rights, freedom of conscience, freedom of association, also just discussed. So basically my presentation is giving you an overview of everything that we've done this morning. Statutory legislation that was also discussed by Doc and those recommendations. So yes, after you have the Constitution, we have the statutory section that talks about the laws. We have a Ministry of Justice. Major role, get those laws done, get those laws out, and look at this. If you go on the ministry's website, the library, they're all there. Every single law, there are no secrets about our laws. If you really want to know, those that have been revised, those that are not revised, those that are very old, those that are being repealed or not. All right? And that's a good thing because that's a part of our understanding in terms of access to information. So, this is the critical part though. With all the laws and the umbrellas, we need to actually see how it plays out on the ground. And so you have policies, procedures, programs, interventions. And these are done at the ministry level. But so we need to contextualize Vision 2030, the new Jamaica. Proud of being Jamaican citizen. If you have no confidence in self, you're twice defeated in the race of life. Again, Marcus Garvey. We are happy to say from a Jamaica government perspective, Vision 2030, as was shared earlier, has these fundamental principles. So they're in black and white. We have a responsibility to make it practical. All right? So the whole, and Ms. Brian Lee explained all of that to us earlier today. Now, Jamaica, the place of choice to live, work, raise, and do business? Oh, do business, it's right there. Do business. It's a people-centered approach, actually. And that's what was discussed earlier. Now there's a rights-based approach to service delivery and service provision. And there is a people-centered approach. You'll realize that if you have a people-centered approach, you look at the needs, circumstances, and preferences of our people. And therefore, you offer the services accordingly. Now, you can't do that. And then there's a rights-based approach which look at these are the fundamental rights, and we have a responsibility as duty bearers to ensure that these rights are there. Our dear friend did explain that there can be conflicts. And that's okay. That's just a part of being human being. It's a relationship, as was discussed by the minister. It's a relationship. So human rights is a relationship that we're building. And so we need to have the conversation in a way where we do it respectfully, understanding that all of us want the same thing. We just need to figure out how to get it done together. So this is just my very fine thing, but I wanted us to be very clear that in Jamaica, there are many ministries. And each of those ministries, if you take it out, there is the Ministry of Education, right to education. Ministry of Health, right to health. So we do have good structures in place. The issue is, are we going to get to the programmatic response where we integrate human rights approaches and people-centered approaches to get everybody to understand their rights and to get them how to actualize it themselves as well. People must also take responsibility. A part of it is, as the government, institutionalizing human rights is going to take a lot, because as was shared by the minister, it means we have to rethink how we do, how we manage, how we lead. And that's a task that we are up to. We're government, we're ready. We have made a very bold step with having a new ministry. We have a human rights unit, and happy to say that Enabling Environment and Human Rights Unit has been in existence at the National Family Planning Board from about 2013 at the National Family Board, but at the Ministry of Health, it has been there for maybe 2 or 3 years before. So we have been fighting this battle, so welcome, and we are ready, all right? So, human rights are not a privilege conferred by government. They're every human being's entitlement by virtue of being a human being. It's a humanity thing, and we need to get it right. So, as we close, human rights, it's all about what do you see. We have many different versions and perceptions. The government today has shared their perception, has shared their idea, has said to everybody in Jamaica, online, abroad, here in the room, that we are ready. We are ready to ensure that when we look at human rights, we're seeing the same things. And even if you look at it and it says half full or half empty, we're looking at the same thing. It's our perceptions. So we are ready to help you to change and to come on board with our perception and to understand how we can work together. Is it a 6 or a 9? It's both. It depends on how you look at it. Let's get human rights right. So, a big thing for us, while the ministry has human rights unit, our unit is called Enabling Environment and Human Rights. And a part of what we want to say from the Ministry of Health and Wellness and the National Family Planning Board is, let's implement rights-based and people-centered approaches when providing and delivering services. Support the environment where people are treated with dignity, respect, and feel empowered. Let your decisions and practices be guided by do no harm principle. And this goes back to private as well as government. This is where when we're having a conversation around human rights, we have to get it right. And if we have the principle behind us saying, let's do no harm, we can make it work. Encourage persons to report breaches and or violations. Office of the Public Defender, we can't implement effective human rights principles and the declaration if we don't have the opportunity to say that I have a problem, I have a concern, let's fix it together. Don't be afraid when people report, it only gets better. And that's the need for monitor and improve the service quality by addressing the gaps. Meaningful partnership leads to comprehensive protection, respect, and fulfillment of human rights. And this is what the government of Jamaica is saying. We are ready to have a meaningful partnership with all stakeholders to ensure that we have comprehensive protection, respect, and fulfillment of human rights. And you can't end a conversation without speaking about the great Nelson Mandela. To deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity. We're human beings first. So let's just get it done. And thank you again. Our entertainer did say Christmas is coming. That's what it says, Santa Claus. That was the song, no? So we're saying human rights coming to you. All right, let's be prepared. Thank you all very much again for an awesome day and staying with us. I hand over to the chair.
Oh, give her a big pre-lunch round of applause. I know the hands are a little heavy. I know we're struggling there, but we're almost there. You know, when you're running a marathon, the last 20 meters, my goodness, Not that you run a marathon, right? The last 20 meters can be very, very daunting, you know. I mean, to get there, you're almost there, but hey, you have covered all this distance, but it's just a little way to go, but you still can't get there. All right, so we're almost at the end. We're at closing remarks. And let me say, let me first of all, on behalf of the minister and the team within the ministry, including our human rights specialists, let me thank you all for taking the time to join us to make your presentations, first and foremost. That is very important to us. You could have done other things, you have other matters to deal with within your locales. So we are very appreciative of the fact that you took the time to come and present. Also want to thank persons who have joined the various platforms, Zoom, YouTube, Facebook. I want to thank you. And some of them are as far as London. And there may be others far east, but they haven't declared themselves. So we want to thank you. If you are Jamaican, living in Jamaica, or in the diaspora, we want to thank you for joining. Or if you're somewhere else outside of the diaspora, we thank you for your participation. In closing, let me state that it is very important that we establish a partnership to protect the rights of all. Because at the end of the day, us as technocrats, we are Jamaicans. We have to ensure our rights are protected too. So I have a vested interest. The minister has a vested interest. I'm sure Captain James has a vested interest. You all have a vested interest, right? In ensuring that your rights are protected, not just external to us, but we all have a vested interest in this. So role of government in general and the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs in particular, I want to highlight those two. Role of government on the one hand, the ministry in particular because of our portfolio responsibility in relation to the protection of human rights. So we have a duty to ensure that we are operating right within the ambit of the Constitution, Chapter 3, Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms. It is very imperative that ministries, departments, and agencies do not violate the rights of its citizens based on its actions or omissions. We have to ensure that we set the law, we frame the laws we are custodians of, but we have to ensure that we protect the rights of citizens, whether it is environmental or otherwise, right, Mrs. Lalita Davis? It is important that government institutions operate above board. However, for rights to be protected, persons must be sensitized. And in sensitizing and augmenting awareness, we're simultaneously empowering our citizens. As simple as this forum is, it is empowering our citizens. New knowledge would have been garnered based on all the presentations. You heard some wonderful presentation about Vision 2030, interconnectedness of rights. You heard about the horizontal and vertical application and how you can bring a matter to court. So you have been provided with a full suite. What you do with the knowledge that you have now acquired is another thing. And we want to say that it is important that you get the facts. You know, we hear many things out there. Get the facts. Ensure that you are in the know and that you are conversant with the Constitution and Chapter 3 in particular. So it's a partnership, ladies and gentlemen. We cannot do it alone. The ministry has this mandate, but we cannot do it alone. That's why you're here. It's a partnership, and we are very hopeful that we can see results in the coming months and years based on this partnership that we have forged with all stakeholders. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade has a role. The Ministry of Justice has a role. The Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport has a role to play. UNAIDS has a role to play. Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. Even the Faculty of Law, University of the West Indies, Norman Manley Law School, Planning Institute of Jamaica, the Attorney General's Chambers, National Family Planning Board. Every stakeholder has a role to play. And that is why you are here. So in closing, we have a constitutional reform committee that will commence work in January, and we are hoping that we will see results. So we have to look holistically at the Constitution, Chapter 3, and make the necessary adjustments in keeping with modern realities and where we want to go as a country. We have to ensure that we take the rights of our people very seriously, and we do. So this is our pledge to you, Jamaicans, that this ministry is very serious about having conversations about the protection of rights, among other things. But I'm singling out this one in particular because of the fact that we're here commemorating Human Rights Day. So I look forward to meeting with you, maybe in your backyard, in the nook and cranny of Jamaica, where we take the message to you. And we certainly hope that we will see results. We certainly hope that you will be empowered. And at the end of the day, we are hoping that Jamaica will be the standard by which all other nations are measured in relation to the protection of human rights. And I want to also close by saying that the ministry has capacitated itself by carrying out the portfolio. It's a process, not an event. We have young Christopher Harper, who is now our senior constitutional reform officer, newly minted. And so we're hoping that our portfolios now will take shape, that we can get things going to achieve results, because we are held accountable. We are accountable to the people of Jamaica, and at the end of the day, we know that you want to see results. So we are very cognizant of that. So ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure in certainly thanking you, and on behalf of the Minister, Minister Malawu Fort, the members of the team, Captain Natalie James, who did a sterling job in putting this forum. I have to single her out, because she has really, since starting early November, she has hit the ground running. And I want to thank you publicly, Captain Natalie James. And of course, we have administrative support, Mrs. Tanya Curry Evans. And you start calling names, you get into trouble. You know, you're going to leave. Yeah, I'm always cognizant of that. Thank you so much, team. I'm big on team. There's no I in team. And so it is a team that will get the results for the ministry and for the country. So thank you, everyone. We close with our saxophonist. And certainly he has been serenading us, particularly the ladies. I see them smiling. And certainly, I think you have set yourself up well for future engagements, sir, albeit within the procurement rules. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone, and great rest of the week. Thank you so much for joining. Take care. Poetry in Motion. Final. It would be remiss of me to not thank, of course, our wonderful saxophonist who did an excellent job, but the Jamaica Information Service, which provided the requisite services, streaming, PA system, everything to make this event possible. Thank you, JS. Thank you. And lunch is now served. Have a great day, everyone.